Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I am here with Abdullah Gondal, and we are going to be discussing the preservation of the Quran. We're going to be looking at some of the evidence that's available and see what the evidence leads to. And I'm going to be asking questions. Abdullah Gondal is going to be doing the presentation, and I'm going to be controlling the slides. As we go through, I'm going to be asking lots of questions to see if we can actually understand this. Now, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel and click on the little set reminder button so you can be notified when new videos are being uploaded and when we go live. How are you doing, Abdullah?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful, thanks. Okay, so should we get into it? Do you want to just introduce the topic?
Yeah, definitely. So, basically, the most commonly held Muslim belief, or the mainstream belief held by Sunni Muslims, is that no word or letter or dot of the Quran has changed since the time of Muhammad. And the Quran that we have now is essentially the exact same Quran that Muhammad recited.
Mhm.
This is the main idea we're going to challenge because we're going to start by viewing some manuscripts
Mhm.
and the variations found in them that vary quite a bit at times.
Okay.
They start from words to whole phrases missing to whole sentences rearranged. Their sentence structure has been changed. We're going to also look into the Samarkand manuscript.
Mhm.
And then we're going to go into a few Qurans that we can find right now and the differences between the Qurans of today. Then we're going to go into some hadith literature and see what they say about certain verses and surahs that have gone missing or were part of the Quran and are no longer part of the Quran. We also touched on the idea of abrogation slightly. So, Abdullah, let's get into it.
Okay, so just to understand a little bit more, are we going to be discussing? We're talking about the Uthmani Quran, that the one that was preserved by Uthman, where he went and burned all of the other copies, and his copy that he compiled became the official Quran that we have today. Is that what we're going to be discussing, or more than that?
The thing is, the manuscripts we have, we can't really, with any certainty, say that this one is what the Osman was propagating as his Quran.
Yeah.
We can carbon date them, and we can see which one rests closer to Osman's time, and from there we can make a guess that okay, this one is most probably the one he proposed to be sent to all the other cities in Arabia at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Quran that was going around at the so let's go back. So the Quran was revealed over 23 years, piecemeal to Prophet Muhammad, and as it was being revealed, I mean, some would say it was revealed in completion in the Lawh al-Mahfud, preserved tablet, and then it was revealed in full on the night of power. That's what some people say, to the angel Gabriel, and then from the angel Gabriel, it was given to Muhammad over 23 years. That's why Allah says that the Quran was revealed in Laylatul Qadr. So this is how some people understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, regardless of whether it came in full or not in full, whatever, it was revealed to Prophet Muhammad over 23 years. Now, the question is that as those 23 years went by, and by the time he died, how much gap was it between the time he died and then the time Uthman actually compiled the Quran? Do you know how many years that is?
Yeah, I believe it was around 15 years, but before Osman, there was a physical copy made by, I believe, Abu Bakr on the advice of Osman, and it was given to one of Muhammad's wife by the name of Hafsa. Later on, when a few of the Hufaz or the people who had memorized the Quran died in one of the battles against, I believe it was against Musaylama, that's when Omar took the matter seriously and he said, okay, let's redo it. And they put Zayd bin Thabit as in charge to gather all the verses and produce a single codex. Now, at that time, there were a lot of differences amongst the companions themselves as to what is the Quran, what verses are to be part of the Quran, what are not. And just to give you a background, that variations have been recorded to the extent that Ubay's codex, Ubay bin Ka'b, one of the companions of the Prophet, who was one of the best Qurra, he had extra two surahs, two chapters in the Quran called Surah Haft and Surah Khal. Then I believe it was Abdullah bin Masud who didn't consider Surah Fatiha the part of the Quran. And there was a certain issue with some ayat numbering as well. And these details have been recorded by Muslim scholars, especially you can look up Suyuti's Itqan fil Ulum al-Quran. That's one major book on it. Then there's Ibn Abu Dawud's Kitab al-Masahif. Then there's Al-Fahrist. So these 3-4 books, they go into a lot of detail and they record a lot of variants. And when you look at the variants, they go into the thousands.
Okay. Before we get into the variants, let's just look at let's talk about the big picture a little bit more. So the Quran was coming piecemeal to Prophet Muhammad. He was, things were happening in his life. For example, the Battle of Badr was happening, and then the Quran says, oh, we had angels coming and fighting with you, and then after the Battle of Badr, there was a bunch of soldiers, right? And then the Prophet said, okay, let's ransom them, let's get the money, right? Like the captives of war. And then after that, it turns out that they were going to come back and fight them again. So then Abu Bakr, Omar had said we should kill them all. And then the Quran revealed you should have killed, a prophet should make a great slaughter in the land. And the story says that Abu Bakr was sitting with Prophet Muhammad and he was crying and they were crying. And Omar said, why are you crying? And the hadith says that, oh, I should have listened to you, Omar, because Allah agreed with you. So, then that's another thing that happened. So as this thing was happening over 23 years, people were memorizing it. They were writing it down on, what were they writing it down on? How were they preserving it?
Normally it was mostly memorized, but we have evidence that they were writing it on bones, parchment papers, leather skins of animals, basically anything they could find to write it down, they would, even on stones and rocks.
And like, when they were writing it down, is it the same Quran that we have today with the dots and
No.
all what were they like what was the form of Arabic?
All the manuscripts that you find early on, they only have the skeletal structure of the words and the alphabets, but they lack any form of diacritical marks. And when we go further into our discussion, we will point out that the lack of diacritical marks actually causes some of the variations that we find in the Qurans today. Because a lot of the words in Arabic, when they're written down, they might be written down the same way, but when you put the zair, zabr, or the dots, or the diacritical marks, they can change the sounds and the meanings drastically.
Right.
And that.
So in English, we have, like, for example, S-A-M-E-E or Samir. There's an A, which is a vowel, and there's an E-E. In Arabic, it would just be seen, and then there'd be a fatha, meme, and then, so that you're saying even the fatha, kasra, dhamma were not written down?
No, they were not written down.
Okay, so and then on top of it, there was also I don't know if you have this, if you're going to go into the topic of how some of the companions were reading it differently as well, and Omar got mad in one situation. Are you going to talk about that as well?
Yeah, there were quite severe differences at points where they conflicted. They even had different codices. I believe it was there's one hadith in Tirmidhi where Abdullah ibn Mas'ud seriously conflicts with Zayd being given the responsibility to compile the Quran, and he uses very derogatory remarks about him, says that I have heard the Quran from the mouth of the Prophet, and Zayd, who is compiling the Quran, he was in his mother's womb at the time, something along the lines of that. And then he says, don't take the Quran from him. And when we go into the details, we'll see how one of the variations that were reported to be in Ibn Masud's codex is actually found in the manuscript itself.
Okay. So now we have the Quran was being revealed, things were happening, Prophet was coming up with revelations as to help him or whatever. But I mean, Allah was revealing things to him, supposedly. And then as time went by, some of them they would write down, mostly they would memorize, and sometimes there'd be some small variations. And then Prophet Muhammad, he's on his deathbed now, his life is coming to an end. The last and final revelation that's supposed to be for mankind, it's still in the minds of people. Nobody's compiled it, nobody's verified it, they're reading it, and then he dies. He doesn't leave any sort of guidance. He doesn't leave any sort of guidance for the community, even as to who should be the next leader. The Muslim community goes into a crisis. As Prophet Muhammad is being washed by Ali, Abu Bakr and Omar have already started to decide, without him, who's going to be the next leader. They have their own secret council. The tribal mentalities are all coming back. People are all, it should be Umayyads or it should be the Hashimis, and each tribe wants to vie and wants to put themselves in charge, because now there's a power vacuum, and there was an irresponsible lack of information that was left by the Prophet. So now, on top of that, the last and final revelation, the most important book that's supposed to be preserved until the Day of Judgment, the evidence for Islam, the cream of the crop evidence, because once Prophet Muhammad is gone, there's no more evidence, right? The only evidence we have is the Quran, which is supposed to be for all times. Where is this Quran right now when the Prophet died?
Basically, the Quran we have right now is a mixture of what the companions said. A lot of the Quran has gone missing, and when you go in the Hadith literature, hundreds of verses are allegedly absent. Some verses were even present and recited by the Muslims after Muhammad had passed away, and they were supposed to be in the Quran, but then they're still not found in the Quran now. So when we examine all the evidence, it's inevitable to conclude that there was definitely foul play. Well, I could say maybe human intervention in the text, in the compilation, and it becomes evident when you go through the manuscripts.
Right. Now, someone's going to say, well, okay, so before we get to that, I want to ask one more question. So Prophet Muhammad dies, the Quran is now in the hearts of people and in, scattered bones and rocks and manuscripts here and there. And now Abu Bakr is the caliph. Abu Bakr dies, Omar becomes a caliph. Omar dies, Uthman becomes a caliph. And now finally they decide to put together. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
So we're talking about, by the time of the fourth, the Prophet, and then Abu Bakr, Omar, and then Uthman. By that point, the one thing, he managed to do is to put it together. Okay, so now this put together Quran, the order of the surahs, is that the same order of the surahs that Prophet Muhammad had them in?
No, actually, there is conflict. Even different manuscripts don't coincide with each other from that time frame, in terms of numbering of the surahs. Also, even in a hadith, I believe it's in Tirmidhi again, where there's a conflict between was Surah Tawbah part of Surah Anfal, or was it a different surah altogether? And then the hadith goes into detail where Osman said, I think it's part of it. Some companions said it's not. And then they weren't sure. They still put it in as a separate surah, but they didn't put the Bismillah.
Okay, so this process is a very human process.
Yeah.
We have to trust that the companions of the Prophet got it right, that Uthman got it right, that the choices of the surahs and the verses that he made, he became the ultimate harbinger of the one that decided which goes in the Quran and in what order, based on whoever he spoke to, right? So this is a very human process, actually, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now, but Muslims will say, well, Allah said He's going to preserve the Quran, right? He's the one that sent it down, and He will preserve it. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's a religious book, and using a religious book to justify its own preservation is circular logic. So to reach the conclusion if the Quran is preserved or not, we have to look at the evidence at hand and then use the evidence to decide if the book has been preserved or not. If you use the Quran as a bias and say, hey, Allah says the Quran is going to be preserved, and therefore the Quran is preserved, therefore the humans couldn't have made mistakes. That's just circular logic, and it's an assertion you can't prove.
Okay, so now one more thing I wanted to bring up, which before we get into the actual evidence, because it's quite interesting. Yasir Qadhi had sent an email to a private list where he had said that the preservation of the Quran, he had let's say he had doubts about the preservation of the Quran, and he was concerned that the preservation that we are taught as Muslims is not the correct preservation, that it's not true. Like it's a human effort. And he had actually written this to a bunch of people. He had sent a private email that people were concerned that what he was saying was bad. So they actually went and actually shared what he said with people. I mean, he had actually said that this actually caused him a crisis of faith, because if the Quran is not preserved, I mean, this is a major problem. This means that, if the Quran is not preserved, then what do we have, right, from the religion, right? And I just want to share this little clip from this email. And what he said is, the preservation of the Quran cannot then be a letter for letter, tashkil for tashkil narrative that later scholars verbalize and the Muslim Ummah is taught. Rather, the preservation must be interpreted in another manner. So he's actually saying that we need to go back and we need to think about in more detail, how can we look at the preservation of Quran, because it's not letter for letter, tashkil for tashkil narrative, right? So and in some of the other emails, now the interesting thing is he has actually gone and he has not spoken about this. The emails are missing. They've been deleted from the internet as far as I can tell. I haven't been able to find them, but some people have access to them, right? Because I have those 2 clips. But obviously there's a bit of a, you can call it a cover up here, right? The scholars, the ones that have actually studied this, they know there's a problem here. Yet they don't want to tell us about why are they doing this? Why don't they just tell us the truth? Like what do they have to hide?
The issue is, right, that all of these variants, all of these compilation of variants, recording of variants is done by Muslim scholars, and every academic scholar has to study it. Like every person who gets a degree in Islamic studies knows about these variants and the extent of these variants. And it's not just sounds, it's actual words gone missing, phrases gone missing.
Yeah.
The reason why they don't tell this to the people and tell them that it's preserved word for word is because the allure of the Quran, the miracle of the Quran will disappear if they tell people that, words kept changing throughout history. And then the idea that the Quran is preserved gets challenged, and then the Quran loses its light about the miracle itself.
Yeah.
And that's why they keep telling people something else, that the Quran is preserved word for word, but deep down they know that it's not. And I really don't like this approach, because this is basically lying to people. And you can ask any common Muslim on the street and ask them, is the Quran preserved? And they will tell you over and over again that it's preserved word for word. You can pick up any Quran in the world and it'll be the same. And even scholars like Maulana Maududi, he's a famous Pakistani scholar, and even in his Tafhim al-Quran, his tafsir he wrote, he says the same thing in the foreword, that it is preserved dot by dot, letter by letter, word by word. And these ulama, they know it. They're lying to themselves, and they're pushing this narrative. So we'll get into it, and what we'll do is we'll start by examining the Sana Quran. And just to show you what it is if you look on the left side, that's the actual parchment, or one of the papers of the manuscript. Now, when you look closely, you can see that there's faded writing in the background. The unique thing about this manuscript is that it has 2 layers of text. Back in the day, paper was very scarce resource. It's hard to come by. It was very precious. So people would do is they would rub or erase the older writing and write more on top of it. Now, the Sana manuscript is exactly that. It's basically animal skin, and over hundreds of years, the lower text starts coming up because the ink they used. Now, if you zoom out and you look to the right side of the screen, what with modern technology we can do is we can extract the lower text. And you can see that they have lifted the lower text out. And once you go down the next slide, what they did is they take the UV light, and when they shine the UV light on it, you can see it illuminate and the text becomes more legible. And that's the picture on the right, number 3. With that put aside, let's go into some of the variations they actually found in the lower text. So what the narrative that's being pushed is the upper text is the one Uthman, had written down, and the lower text was some other companion's codex, and they just reused the paper from there. Now, one of the findings, if you look on the left-hand side in the table, this is a paper that was written by two Muslim scholars. I think it's one's from Stanford University and one's from Harvard University, and they studied the manuscript. Is in the standard text of the Quran today, in Surah 2, verse 196, there's a word, ru'usakum, which is basically your heads. Do not shave your heads until the offering reaches its destination. When you look at the Sana manuscript, you see that the word ru'usakum is missing. It's not there. Even though it doesn't change the meaning that much, but there's one word that has been added. One of the other things they found is in the standard text, if any of you be sick. So it says faman kana in the standard text, but in the Sana manuscript, it says fa in kana ahadun. So there's a slight difference there as well.
So what I think of when I hear things like this is I think of like if I told you a sentence and I told you to repeat it back to me and you repeated it back to me, these are the type of mistakes you would make, right? Like because these are like memory errors, right? Like instead of saying, should one of you become sick, you would say, well, if one of you becomes sick. Like this is a very human mistake, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's how you would expect humans to pass on like verbal messages.
Yeah.
So again, in 2196, it says that in the standard text, it says fasting or alms or an offering. So basically, the standard text has aw sadaqatin aw nusukin, but the Sana manuscript only has aw nusukin. So there's literally two words that are additional found in the current Quran. If we go to the next example, Surah Baqarah, verse 201, again, it says that the standard has hasanatan wa fil akhirati hasana. So the lower text or the Sana manuscript has wal akhirati instead of the longer version. So there's a few phrases that are missing here again.
Okay, so just remind me one more time. All of these differences have been found where?
They're in the Sana manuscript, and they're being compared to the standard Hafs Quran that we have right now.
So the Sana manuscript is the one that was rubbed out on the back of the paper that was reused. Is that what it is?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. All right. Okay, interesting. Okay, continue.
So here again in Surah 63, verse 7, the Sana manuscript has min hawlihi after the words yanfaddu in the ayah, whereas the standard text does not have min hawlihi. And these are again two phrases that are missing.
Okay,
so if you zoom out, and I believe you can go to the next page on the right side, which is very interesting. Can you go a little higher? The previous slide.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I've highlighted something that the author wrote. However, when the manuscripts are illuminated with ultraviolet light, the text that was scraped off becomes visible. The results are quite interesting. Words and phrases have been changed and entire verses have been rearranged. The fact that these kind of variants only exist in palimpsest is a word specifically for a parchment paper that has this layered text, indicates that there was a period when there was more variation in the text of the Quran. And as time progresses, you will see that there's an effort. It almost seems like there's a continuous revision going on to make it sound better and better and make it more clear. Now, one of the really staggering variations they find is if you go down, there's an ayah in the Quran, and here's where it's very interesting. The ayah is وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي مَحِيدِهُنَّ وَاعْتَزِلُوهُنَّ حَتَّى يَتَطَهَّرْنَ. It's about periods and approaching women. But in the Sana Quran, the whole sentence structure has changed drastically. It says فَاعْتَزِلُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيدِ وَلَا تَقْرَبُوهُنَّ حتى يطهرن. So you see that verse 222 from Surah Baqarah is drastically different as seen in the manuscript itself. And this indicates that there was definitely human play or humans involved in this. And you can see that even the N word, yatatahhan, there's extra letters added to it. The ta isn't even there. So this is very interesting, and it's a major variant. Now, if you notice just below it.
So hold on. So I want to ask a little bit more about this. Okay. So we don't go too fast. So this is an example where there's two different versions of the Quranic ayah 222, which is talking about taking a bath and then whatever and purifying yourself. And the interesting thing is there's two different versions of this ayah, but they both mean the same thing. So this is yet another example of, it's not like it's a totally different ayah. It's the same ayah, but it's said differently, which again is something, it's a very human thing to do. It's like you kind of not sure what it is, or you heard it differently. And in both cases, they still have the same meaning. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. The meaning is the same, but the sentence structure just changed.
Okay, so the sentence structure has changed. Now the Sana Quran that they're finding all of this, how old is that manuscript?
The manuscript is dated to be as one of the oldest ones that they found. I believe it's dated to around Uthman's time. Also, the one they found, the Birmingham manuscript as well, is also said to be one of the oldest ones.
Okay. So these are quite early on.
Yeah. Okay. If you notice in the pictures as well that there are no diacritical marks, no slashes or lines, right. Just a little makeup of the letters.
Okay. So even then, on top of that, you wouldn't know whether the word is like li, la, lu, like ya, he, you. You'd have to guess based on the context and based on the sentence.
Yeah.
And potentially there could be two valid ways to interpret it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And not only that, I mean, even modern Arabs, when they're writing, they don't put the tashkil, but they do put the dots for ya or ta, ba or ba, right? So at least if it's a ba or a ya or a ta. But here, there's not even that.
Yeah, it's not there.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll continue. So where do you want to go? You want to go here now?
Yeah. So this ayah is very interesting. So in Surah Tawbah, ayah number 74, in the current Quran, it says, يَتَوَلَّوْا يُعَذِّبُهُمُ اللَّهُ عَذَابًا أَلِيمًا فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ وَمَا لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. Translation goes, if they turn away, Allah will punish them with a painful punishment in this world and the hereafter, and there will not be for them on earth any helper or protector. But when you look at the Sana manuscript, you find that many words are just not even present. The Sana manuscript is يَتَوَلَّوْا يُعَذِّبُهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَمَا لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. So يُعَذِّبُهُمُ اللَّهُ, there is no word azaban alima, there is no word of wal akhirah, and these are at least three words that are missing from the original manuscript.
Okay, so I have another question for you. When the Quran says, Quran itself challenges viewers, readers, and it says, come up with another surah like it. Could we not just use these examples of old manuscripts that are actually Quran but not Quran? Wouldn't that fulfill the challenge?
It could. And when I think of it, because it still matches all the grammatical rules and all the requirements, but it's just slightly different, and it'll put them in a dilemma too, that wait, which one's from God,
Yeah. And it sounds similar. It has a different meaning, right? It's like, it's close to what we have in the Quran, but it's not the Quran. So maybe someone should rebuild the Sana manuscript, and we'll say, well, that's the challenge. Challenge has been fulfilled. Okay, let's continue.
So if you go to your right, in the next variant, here you see like one word is completely different. Even the skeletal structure, it's a different word. So in the current Quran, we have أَغْلُظْ عَلَيْهِمْ وَمَأْوَاؤُهُمْ جَهَنَّمُ وَبِئْسَ الْمَصِيرُ. But in the Sana manuscript, the word Jahannam is replaced by the word Nar. So Jahannam means hell, and Nar means the fire. The meaning doesn't change, but again, that's exactly how you would expect a human to transmit it. He's like, yeah, somebody's gonna burn. Someone says, oh, it was Nar, it was Jahannam. And this is so human.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
if you go down 974 again, the current Quran has يحلفون billah in the beginning of the verse. But when you notice the manuscript, it has a different skeletal structure, and instead of يحلفون, the word is يقسمون. It's the same meaning almost. It's a synonymous word, but again, the idea that humans tend to slightly change words, although they can preserve the meaning. And that's again what it shows, that there has been changes made. There are more. If you want to access the paper, we will definitely link it in the description. The authors of the paper at the end, they write down all of what they could read from the lower and the upper text. Sometimes it's not visible completely, the lower text. So hence you see the horizontal lines and the dots as to which they could not make out.
Okay.
Yeah. But they show us staggering variance as well, and they go into detail where literally, I think verse 85 of Surah 9 isn't even present in the manuscripts. There's been like 3 to 4 to 5 phrases added, and there's a multitude of variations found in the Sana manuscript. Also, another good reference book for reading, if you want to go into a lot of detail, Dr. Asma Hilali just came out with a book, and it's called the Sana Palimpsest, I believe. If you can check that out. You can go into a lot more detail. There's also another book called the Which Quran, and it's a compilation of different studies by different scholars, and it's been authored by Ibn Waraq. But there's other scholars in the field like Jared Puin and others that have done a lot of research. Now what we can do is we can go to another manuscript, the Samarkand Quran. And this one has quite a lot of variants as well, where whole words go missing.
So what's this one?
This is one of the earlier Qurans found as well.
Okay.
And it gets its name because it's in Samarkand. Also, I think it's known as the Topkapi Quran.
Okay.
It depends on where they're being stored and which museum has them.
Okay. So if we actually were to believe the standard narrative that the entire Quran, word for word, letter for letter, was preserved, was sealed by Uthman, which was identical to Muhammad's Quran, and then there shouldn't be any variants in the manuscript, correct? Because I mean, Uthman sent his copy all over the world. So why do you think we find variants? Like, what's going on here?
Exactly. One of the issues is, firstly, that before Uthman wrote down his Quran, the Sahaba had huge conflicts. There's a reason why he had to burn the Qurans, because there were lots and lots of variations arising.
Right.
And the second thing is that about 200 years later, there's a hadith in Sahih Bukhari and stuff where they narrate, it says that Gabriel came to Muhammad and he recited the Quran to him in different ahruf. And ahruf basically means lettering or wording.
Okay.
But
okay.
again,
Before we get there, let's leave that for a bit, because that's just a little bit too much. So one more thing about Uthman. So we're talking about a man who tried to make one copy, one official version of the Quran for everyone, for the whole ummah, and he destroyed all of the alternative ones. One of the interesting points is, why would you ever need to destroy, competing copies? That, like, if you have the official one, you're the caliph, you're the leader of the entire Muslim ummah, wouldn't you want there to be varying copies just to give more credence to your copy? Like, it's almost like you're scared of the differences, right?
Yeah, it's a bad spot on integrity as well. Like, why was he so scared that he had to burn all the Quran? And it's not like it's just a random book. At that time, people were actually really mad at him for doing that too, even the Sahaba, because they said that it's the word of Allah. And even Ubay bin Ka'b and Ibn Masud strongly disagreed with Uthman on this issue, and believe Ibn Masud didn't even want to give up his own codex, and they had to forcefully take it from him and burn it. So
Do you think they smuggled some copies out? Do you think, because I can imagine if there was like a caliph coming or a leader and he said, I'm going to burn all your Qurans, and you're like, well, this is the Quran I wrote with my own hand, or my son or my father wrote, and he heard it from Muhammad, it would be really special to you, right? You wouldn't want to just give it up. Do you think there's some smuggling that happened and they snuck out some of them? Because some of the Qurans were by this point already outside of Makkah and Medina, right? Like the good one, right?
Again, yes, that probably was the case, and that's why we see some of the variants that were reported to be in the codices of Ibn Masud or Ubay bin Ka'b. We find those variants, in one instance is a lower text of the Sana manuscript. So one could say that maybe the variants that we see in the lower text is basically an older codex from Ibn Masud, whose pages were cleaned and Osman's Quran was written on top of it.
Right.
Again, with the smuggling out of the Qurans, when you look at the hadith, you see that there are statements where Ibn Masud says, hide your Qurans, don't give up your mushafs. He was telling people, he was, I believe, an imam at, I'm not sure which city, but it was in Mecca or Medina, and he was telling his people that...
Kufa, maybe? Something like that?
I think it was Kufa. He said, don't give up your mushafs to Osman and Zayd and all those people.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so well, this is important, I think, to kind of just go back to the whole bigger picture from time to time, because this is a very technical topic, and sometimes you just get drowned in the details. But we need to keep re-emphasizing that every single religion that we've seen suffers from the same human problems, right? I mean, I think not just me, but you, both of us, we really truly believe this was the inerrant, literal, ayah for ayah, dot for dot. And I've even heard, like, for example, Yusuf Estes, like proudly boasting that I used to be a Christian, and in my Bible, there's hundreds of copies, whatever, but the Quran, it fulfills the prophecy in the Bible of letter for letter, dot for dot preservation. But it's just not true. It's just something we want to be true, right? But sadly, it's not true.
Exactly. So in this variant, we see that in verse 283 of Surah Baqarah, the manuscript just says, أَوْ تُمِنْ آمَنَتْهُ وَلِيَتَّقِ رَبَّهُ, while the standard Quran says, وَلِيَتَّقِ اللَّهَ رَبَّهُ. So there's the word Allah is not present in the manuscript. And you will see this as a very recurring theme. The word Allah is skipped quite a few times in the manuscript, but appears later on in the current Qurans.
It's interesting. The reason I'm laughing, I'm not being like, the reason I think this is actually quite interesting and funny almost is because you have a bunch of people that believe there's a mathematical miracle in the Quran, and they're like, well, if you add up the number of times this occurs and you add up the number of times that occurs, but what we're seeing here is like there's entire words that have been removed. It's almost like if someone wanted to do that, they could have done it. Like they could have sat down. I mean, it's a silly thing to think that someone would go through the Quran and start removing words in order to make the math work, but it's just interesting. Sorry.
Yeah. So if we go down to the next slide, what we see is again the same issue. In the next verse in the same manuscript, in 284 of Surah Baqarah, it says, وَيُعَذِّبُ مَن يَشَاءُ وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. But in the current Quran, it says, وَيُعَذِّبُ مَن يَشَاءُ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. So the word huwa has been replaced with the word Allah in the current Quran.
Wow, interesting. Again, makes you wonder, like, why does it have a different word?
And once you go down further in Surah Ali Imran, verse 37, there's a whole 2 words gone. They're added later on. So in the manuscript it says min indallah yarzuqu man yasha'u bighayri hisab. But in the current Quran it says min indallah inna Allah yarzuqu man yasha. So the phrase inna Allah is additional found in the current Quran.
Wow.
Now if you go to Surah Al Imran verse 109, again, you see the same pattern. The word Allah is found in the current Quran, وَإِلَى اللَّهِ تُرْجَعُ الْأُمُورُ, but in the manuscript, the word Allah is missing.
Wow.
And then the same thing again. If you go down to 5:119, Surah Ma'idah, verse 119, the current Quran says, رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ وَرَضُوا. But in the manuscript, it says, Radiyanhum wa radwan. The word Allah is again skipped.
Wow. That's again. Whoa.
Now, the next one is really interesting because here it's a huge two words that are not found in the manuscript. The current Quran reads, وَهُوَ الَّذِي أَنْشَاءَ جَنَّاتٍ مَعْرُوشَاتٍ وَغَيْرِ مَعْرُوشَاتٍ. But in the manuscript, the words غَيْرِ مَعْرُوشَاتٍ aren't even found. It says مَعْرُوشَاتٍ وَالنَّخْلِ وَالزَّرْعِ. And it does have a meaning implication as well. If we continue forward, in Quran Surah 7 verse 27, you see that there's the word min found in the Arabic. لِيُرِيَهُمَا مِن سَوْآتِهِمَا. But the min is missing in the current Quran. Now, on the left-hand side, if you zoom in, you will see that there's a bunch of variations. There's a bunch of deviations found from the current Quran. The word if you scroll down a little, please, Abdullah. So the word in the manuscript is wama, but the word in the current Quran is falamma. So the va has been changed for a fa, and there's an extra lam in the middle.
Interesting. And again, I just want to say this one more time because this is what I was taught. I was taught that when it says fa, fasbir, right? Wattaqullah instead of wattaqullah, there's a subtle difference. And Allah is using precisely the right word at the right place with the right meaning because he's Latiful Khabir. He is the one that's the most subtly acquainted with the mysteries of the universe. So this breaks my heart when I see this because it makes me feel like this is just a lie that has been, it's almost like the more you read a book, the more things you can find in it to talk about, right? Like look how Allah was so precise here. But when we're looking now, what we're finding is wholesale replacement of wa with fama or lamma, falamma, or like yatatahharun becomes yutahhirun. It's like those subtle nuances are all gone, right? Like, I mean, we don't even know now, like, are these real? Is this an accurate Quran?
Yeah, exactly. If you go to the right, the picture on the right side, it's an interesting one too, is in Surah Fussilat, verse 31, the current Quran says, نَحْنُ أَوْلِيَاءَكُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. But instead of that, in the manuscript, it seems to say, نحن وليكم في الدنيا. And you can see that awliya needs an extra ya, an extra alif, an extra vowel, but all of those letters are missing and it's waliyukum. The meaning doesn't change that much, but again, that's a few extra letters added into it. There are many, many more variants of this kind. I just brought up just a few from the manuscripts, just the major ones that I found.
Yeah.
Here, what we're going to touch on is the variants in the modern Quran. Now, here's what I got to give you a little bit of a background story, is there are different riwayas or different transmissions of the Quran. The most popular one that we see now is Hafs Quran. And this only became popular or became the more widespread version in 1924 when Al-Azhar canonized it. In Islamic studies, Quran sciences, people regard the Warsh Quran, the Duri, Susi, and a couple other Qurans as all equally valid. Now, scholars differ as to the amount of Qurans that are all authentic. Some total we have is about 14 versions. Some say out of those 14, 10 are Sahih. Some say out of those 14, 7 are only accepted.
Hold on. You're saying Sahih doesn't only apply to Hadith, now it applies to Qurans?
Yeah, it does, because yeah.
I've never heard this before.
Yeah. So normally what happens is there were major 7 teachers of the Quran that orally passed it on, and each of them had 2 students. So when you suppose the Quran you read is Hafs min Asim, and there's another version from Hafs, and there's Warsh from Nafi, and so on and so forth, and there's Duri and Susi, etc. Now, all the following screenshots I have, they are all taken from QuranFlash.com. It's a Muslim site, and they have all these different mushafs. And you can actually buy these different mushafs in different parts of the Muslim world. Some revisions of the Quran are more dominant and more prevalent in certain parts of the Muslim world. Like suppose Northern Africa, I believe, has more people using the Warsh Quran. And then most of the Muslim world use the Hafs, but they're still equally all authentic. So let's dive down into the variants in the modern Quran.
So I want to just give an interesting story before we do that. I remember in one of the masjids I was going to, where they invited an imam, Hafiz, to come from a different country to lead the prayer. And he led the prayer in one of the variants, right? And everybody was like freaking out. They're like, what's going on? He read it differently. Like he's using a different like word or something, right? And then they had to explain. And so after that, they always explained before, every night, guys, we're going to be reading a different variant, because I think most Muslims are not aware of these 7 variants. Now I have to ask a question again. Now this is okay. So now this is official Qurans that are agreed upon, that are in use today. We're not talking about some manuscript that has some changes that's lost, and we're confused why it's different. We're talking about agreed upon Qurans that are read in the Muslim world, that are memorized. There's people that's memorized. I know one guy that actually memorized all of them, right? So he knows all of the rules and he's memorized all of them. Most people don't know about this, but again, it begs the question: did this divine creator of the universe give us this several variated Qurans? Does that even make sense? Like, what is that? Like, what we have 2 possibilities. We have one possibility that the Lord of the universe created this, sent this book, and somehow ended up with 7 different versions with different recitations and whatever. On the other hand, you have the possibility this is a man-made work, whatever you want to call it, poetry or whatever, and it's it got fractured. It got fractured into multiple versions because of human nature, because of the way that people memorize or whatever, because for whatever reason. Which is more likely? Like, we got to ask the question, and Muslims have to ask themselves, like, which is true? That there's several versions of this immutable Quran, right? Or is it that this is a work of man, right? So I think that's something to kind of reflect on.
Exactly, and the variants we see do reflect that what you would expect from humans. If a book was preserved by humans, this is what you would expect. And if it was from God, then what's the point in having so many different ones? And it's making it so hard to believe that it was actually preserved, because it seems more objectively likely that it was not from God and it was mostly work of man and work of fallible humans, and hence we see the variants. So let's start. So all the ayahs we will leave in the description, the numbers. I have just highlighted the variants. So if you start from the top left, if you notice that in one of the Qur'ans, I believe it's Hafs and Warsh here, it says, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْغَنِيُّ الْحَمِيدُ. But in the other version, the word huwa is missing. It's just فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. If you go underneath that, there's a slight variation, and that's what I want to point out here is you notice that the words are written the same, but due to the lack of diacritical marks in the early manuscripts, you're observing this variation where yaqtulun and yuqatilun get mixed up because there weren't no dots. Now, the variation is one meaning would be they fought, and the other meaning is they got killed.
Wow. So this is a perfect example of how lack of dots has ended up with two Qurans.
Yeah.
Different meanings. Now, again, why would God use a language like this? That needs, like, this doesn't even make sense. Like, you know what I mean? Like, again, we're left with problems with the official story. But anyways, continue, Sai.
So if you look at the top right now, in one Quran we see wa kutubihi, and then the other one we see wa kitabihi. And this is a difference in singular and plural. One place it says a book, and the other place it says the books. And the same thing right underneath it is it says, again, due to the lack of diacritical marks, both these variants, the kutubi kitabihi, it says kuffar, which means many disbelievers. And on the other one, it says kafir, which means one disbeliever.
Okay. That's terrible.
Then again, if you see the one below it, it's wama amilathu, and the other one says wama amilat. There's an extra ha, which the meaning slightly changes, that their hands sent forth and the hands sent forth. Basically, the bad and good deeds it's talking about here.
So what do Muslims say? They say that all of these variants, all of these meanings are correct.
Yes, they say that the meanings change slightly, not too much. They don't take away the central message of the Quran, or there's no variant that really creates a lot of implications. But there are issues in some of the variants where there's one part in Surah Baqarah, I believe, in the Hafs Quran, it says Ta'ami Miskin, and the Warsh Quran, it says Ta'ami Masakin, or it could be vice versa. That one place it says feed one poor after breaking your fast, and the other verse it says feed many poor people. So here you have a fiqh problem too, because one verse can complicate and say, okay, you got to feed many people as a compensation for suppose missing a fast, but the other one says you have to feed only one poor person. There's another variant in Surah Ma'idah, the ayah of the wudu ayah, and this was recorded by Imam Abu Hanifa, I believe. And the reading he said changed the way the ending of the wudu is done. And that's why you see Shias, they don't wash their feet with water. They just rub a wet hand on their feet. So these variations can affect and can complicate some jurisprudence issues as well.
Wow. Amazing. Okay.
So if you go down to the next slide, you see that on the left-hand side, there's one place that says ihsana, and the other place that says husna. The meaning is almost identical, but it's just to show that there's an extra alif in one. And also, due to the lack of diacritical marks, you get this variant.
Husna means like good, right? And ihsan means like the best good, right?
Exactly. It's not a huge issue there in terms of meaning. The next one's interesting, and you see this happen a lot in different Qur'ans. I've just highlighted one aspect, I believe, the qul and the qala. Qul basically means that Allah is commanding somebody to say something to the people or do something. Whereas qala means that Allah is quoting somebody else who said something.
Wow.
So you get into a conundrum, like, did God instruct them to say it, or is God quoting what they said?
Wow, that's a huge difference.
And this is not just one. This is in many places. We'll link the whole post in the description where you can go into details.
Damn, this is crazy. Yeah, I think there's probably websites out there that have kind of summarized the differences between the different riwayat, the different versions. And I think, again, most Muslims are not aware that there's multiple riwayat of the Quran with different words, different letters. And again, this comes back down to choice of language used to preserve the Quran, the method. I mean, if me or you wanted to make a book and wanted to preserve it, we would be doing this scientifically. We'd be sitting down, we'd be checking it, cross-checking it. We'd probably put some sort of checksum in there. We'd probably, we'd be spending a lot of effort. But what we find with the Quran is like, it's not like that. It's just like, we don't even know, right? We're not sure. There's different versions. There's different wordings. Did Allah say it, or did Allah say, did someone else say it, right? It's just massive differences, like for a book that's supposedly from the creator of the universe. And again, it comes down to what I call it, like having low expectations of God. We expect so little of God. Like, really? Like, the same God that you're saying can create binary pulsar stars, he can't even make a book properly? Like, can't preserve his book? Come on. Like, this is we need to have higher standards of God. Like, how is this God's work? This doesn't seem like God's work.
Yeah, it constantly appears more and more human the more you look at it. And they say the devil lies in the details. So so the next variant is the same as Abdullah mentioned earlier, like the precision and the difference the words like fa vidwa could make. Like one place it says wala yakhafu uqbaha, but the other one it says fala yakhafu uqbaha. So it's and fa normally is after. So if you go to the top right of the slide, you see the variant in one Quran it says ma tashtahihil anfus, and the other one it says ma tashtahil anfus. So there's an extra ha in one of them. The one underneath is wama asabakum min musibatin fabima. But one of the other Quran says wama asabakum min musibatin bima. So the letter fa is missing, and the ayahs are also differently numbered.
Yeah, that's another thing that surprised me when I was working on verse by verse Quran. I couldn't create the same. I couldn't create the same structure because some of them are numbered differently. Some of these variants, which again,
exactly. Just to touch on one of the implications of this is, if you've listened to Nouman Ali Khan's Linguistic Miracles, but this one miracle he brings up is that in Surah Baqarah, in verse 143, Allah says that you are the middle nation, and that's the middle of the surah, because the surah is 286 verses. But when you look at the other Qur'ans, no, the surah is sometimes 287 verses, sometimes 288. So, the miracle only kind of seems to work for one type of the Qur'an and not the other one. So is it really a miracle or a coincidence? And there's numerous things like this. And as you said earlier, like it implicates the mathematical miracle claim as well. Anyways, so if
I just want to add a little bit more to what you said. The longer you spend studying a book, this book has 6,236 verses in it. In the Hafs, version, you will find something that you can talk about. Oh, look, the beginning and the end is talking on the same topic. Oh, look, there's a structure, there's a ring pattern. Oh, look, the next surah is talking about the ending, is talking about the beginning of the one before it. MashaAllah, like really, come on. Like, again, such low standards for God that you have to look. Anyways, okay, sorry, let's continue.
So on the left-hand side, you see that one of the Qur'ans, if you go a little up, so one says, أو أن يظهر في الأرض الفساد, but the other just says وأن يظهر. So the words change as an extra alif, and it ends up being as or and. So there's a slight difference there. Then there's the other one again, as Abdullah mentioned, وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ, and then فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. So there's a wow and a fa changed in there.
And there's another example, right, where the surah, the verse that talks about you can marry 2 and 3 and 4 wives. It actually says 2 and 3, right? Mitna wa thulatha wa arba. It's you wonder, is that a style? Is that is it a style in the Arabic language, or is it a mistake? And the funny thing is, whenever you find mistakes, people change it and they say, no, this is the unique style of Allah. And it becomes like, like a miracle. They redefine the rules for the Quran.
Exactly. A lot of the Quran does have some grammatical errors in the Arabic language as well. But what the people started doing is they say, oh, this is from God, and they make an exception rule just for the Quran in the Arabic language to accommodate that error.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So one example I think is iltifaf. I believe you can look it up. It's a long topic.
Okay.
Let's just not get into that. So the next variant is, again, there's a missing vowel. One says alladhina, one says walladhina. Says and those, and the other ayah says just those believers or people who took the masjid. So if you go to the top right of this slide, this is an interesting variant because in one ayah, it's believed from Surah number 18, Surah Kaf. One says khayram minha, and the other one says khayram minhuma. Now, minha means from it, meaning from one thing, whereas minhuma meaning from two things. So there you have a different meaning again. And then you also notice that the ayahs have been divided differently. So again, it affects the n number of how many ayahs there are in the surah, etc.
Wow, why would they do that? Like, what was the point of that?
Exactly. Like ayahs, the division of ayahs varies differently. It's almost at times starts seeming arbitrary. And depending on which person heard it, recited in a certain way, who they probably heard it from stopped at a certain point. And they said, okay, that's where you put an end to the ayah. But the other person said, no, they'll keep going and the ayah is longer. So it varies. And then that also implicates, again, like the precision, like if Allah is saying something, one sentence you're stating it succinctly, but it goes on for like 3 sentences, so.
Yeah, again, that's another very interesting point. Like when this was first revealed, people were just reading this thing, right? And eventually it got its way into writing. And at that point, somebody needs to now decide what's ayah 1, what's ayah 2. Like, I mean, you even in like Surah Baqarah, you have like a one long ayah where there's like an optional pause, and there's places where you can't stop because it changes the meaning, right? So the scholars, and I think this is what Yasir Qadhi might have been hinting to, the whole science of preservation of Quran has been built for us over the centuries. It wasn't just given to us intact by the Prophet, but we don't know that. We don't see that, right?
Yeah. Now, the next variant is one place it says anjana, and the other place it says anjaytana. It's just we saved you, as in it's the same meaning per se. It barely varies, but again, there's like an extra few letters in one of the words, whereas they're missing in the other one. Let's keep going to the one below. All right. So on the left side, you see again that a plural and singular problem. One place it says lil kutub, while the other place it says lil kitab. So there's books and a book.
So just to remind everyone one more time, we are discussing the different variants of the Quran, Warsh versus Hafs, for example, versus Susi. There's a bunch of them. All official. These are all official recitations of the Quran, which the Muslim Ummah has agreed upon. I just want to share this, right? Hold on. 10 kilowatt, right? Okay, give me 1 second. I just want to share this so people can see this, because just for a second. Screen share. Okay. Okay, here we go. So if you go to About Tajweed, for example, we have the 10 qira'at right here, right? Nafi, Ibn Kathir, all of them, right? We also have, was it QuranFlash.com?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is where you actually, I have to enable it. This is where you actually got these Okay, it doesn't flash as well. It can go for me. Okay, I won't be able to show it. Okay, anyways, anyone who wants to see it, you can go to quranflash.com. If you want to read about this topic in a little bit more detail, we're not making this up. These are the 10 Qiraat. There's 10 of them listed right here. And as Abdullah Gondal was saying, there's even more than that. Okay,
I have 14 myself.
And like, so you can actually see, like, you know, people teach this as part of Islamic classes. Okay, so let's go to a few more examples that you have prepared for us. Okay. Oops.
Yeah. All right. So we already did this one. Let's just go to the next one next to it.
Yep.
To the right, I believe.
This one?
Yeah, this one. So here, one place it says yara, walau yara allazina, and the other one it says walau tara allazina, which basically changes the meaning slightly, like you saw compared to they saw. And that can drastically affect the meaning, because who saw what, you know?
I feel so
I
sad
can't really see your
thing.
screen clearly. It's really cropped, or did you just zoom in a lot?
I zoomed in a lot, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so yellow right here at the top, and what was it? Walau taro. So
yeah.
Both of them are visible there. Okay.
Now, I believe on the extreme right-hand side, there's one more variant on this slide.
Bushra.
And Nushra. So Bushra means glad tidings or good news, and Nushra, I believe, means winds or wind. So that's quite a bit of difference. Can you zoom out a little bit, Abdullah?
Yep.
Because it's just showing me like a very zoomed in, almost half the screen. It's not properly sharing it.
How about now?
It's still not. I can only see the one variant, Lil Kutub.
Okay, 1 second.
Yeah. Oh, that looks much better, I guess.
Hold on. I'm just gonna zoom out and zoom in again.
All right, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, I just closed and opened it. Okay.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Again, here's the same thing on the left side, Yarawnahum and Tarawnahum. Who saw what? Like you saw, they saw. Then on the next one in the middle, it's Yudkhilhu, Nudkhilhu. He would enter them into Jannah, and we would enter you into Jannah. It's not a big difference. But the one next to it is interesting. This is a beautiful example of why the lack of diacritical marks can affect the meaning. Kabira and Kathira, their skeletal structure is exactly the same. They're written the exact same way. Is where you put the dots is what changes the meaning. Kabira means the great or the greatest or greater, but Kathir or Kathira means abundance. So these words are not even synonymous per se.
Wow.
So in one place it says Allah curses them with the great curse, and the other one it says Allah curses them abundantly.
Well, Allah is quite generous with his curses. In some lots of them. In some cases, he gives big ones.
Okay, let's go to the next one. Again, in the left side, you see ma nunazzil and ma tanazzal. It's again an example of why diacritical marks missing can create variance. It doesn't really vary the meaning too much.
Why are people saying the Quran is a linguistic miracle? I'm left scratching my head after seeing this. Like, I haven't studied this topic since I left Islam. It's been 3 years. I never looked into this, and now that you're like showing me this, I'm wondering, like, yeah, which Quran has a linguistic miracle? Like,
exactly.
Like they don't even on each other.
And again, on the right side, you see the same ta'malun and ya'malun. They did and you did. Who did the deed? You know,
Allah did it.
And here's an interesting one. On the left side, the meaning is still preserved, but one place it says sihran and the other place it says sahiran. So one place it means 2 works or 2 acts of magic, and the other one it says 2 magicians.
The Quran is a miracle because it has been preserved. It has been memorized by millions of people. Do you know how many times I've heard this? I even wrote an article on this on my blog. What has been preserved? we don't know what's been preserved. There's like multiple Qurans here with different meanings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Again, nun shizuha, nun shiruha, another example of one dot changing the meaning slightly. Instead of a ra, there's a za. So that changes the meaning a little bit, but it doesn't really affect the message as a whole in that ayah. If we go down again, there's another example of qala turning into qul. So one place it says that the person Allah is quoting said to Allah, "Oh Allah, you know what's in the heavens and the earth, and you're the all-knowing." But the other place, Allah is commanding the person to say that to other people. And that's the problem.
Wow.
Who said it first?
Wow. Like, so we don't know. We actually don't know because both of these are authentic. We don't know whether it's Qala Rabbi or what's the other one? Qul Rabbi? I can't see. I can't see because of the circle. So it's either Qul Rabbi or Qala Rabbi. Wow. Okay, let's continue. That's crazy.
Yeah, the one on the right is a very minor one. It's just a missing wow. So the Hafs Quran says wasari'u, and the other one says sari'u. So basically, hasten towards your Lord for forgiveness, and the other one says and hasten towards your Lord for forgiveness.
Wouldn't the and like would let's say you're just reading this and you don't stop there, then the and would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You know what I mean? Like if you're just reading it out loud and it's not, again, it comes back to this, what we discussed earlier, which is where do you split the verses, right? And if you split it, then you don't need the wow. But if you don't split it, I mean, I'm not saying it's split in the different versions, but I'm just saying when you go from an oral recitation to a written book and you're putting numbering in there now, I mean, that can kind of help understand this whole conundrum here.
Yeah. So just to further the topic, what we're going to touch upon now is very important. It's the idea of abrogation and the missing verses from the Quran that have been brought to us through the Hadith literature. Again, this weighs heavily upon acceptance of the Sunni Islam tradition that they regard the Hadith as authentic.
Okay, so let's just summarize the last topic one more time. Can you just summarize it in like one or two sentences, what we've learned from the different riwayat?
Yeah, so basically what we notice is people, when they transmit the Quran, they transmitted it orally, and then different people heard it from different people and passed it along. Those different people had students, and they transmitted the Quran orally through them to us. Now, that ended up becoming different riwayas of the Quran. So one riwayah supposes Warsh from Nafi, and the most common one is Asim, and then there's other riwayas like Duri, Susi, Khalaf, etc. These are all regarded as authentic. These Qur'ans are available right now. You can buy them in different parts of the Muslim world, and you can even buy them online. And the issue being raised here is the belief is being challenged that there's only one Arabic text and that no dot or letter varies from that unified text. What we come to learn is there are many different differences in these different Qur'ans. Sometimes the meaning changes merely, sometimes it changes slightly, sometimes it can change a lot. Sometimes it can also implicate the fiqh or the jurisprudence issues as well. This brings us to the question that this is a book what appears to be, or is it appears to what you'd expect it to be if it was preserved by humans. They would hear something, they would pass it along, but with slight variations. With that being said, the Quran is relatively much well preserved than other religious texts. You can still say that the variations are not crazy in the sense that the current Quran we have from the Sana manuscript has like whole chapters of hundreds of verses missing or added to it. But again, to summarize, that there are variants in the modern version of the Quran. The belief that is propagated amongst the Muslims that there's only one Quran, one Arabic, no dot or letter has changed, is unfounded, unacademic, and an absolute lie.
Okay, great. Well said. Well said. Okay, now Now, as you were saying, I like that little disclaimer you put there. We are going to be going into the Sunni corpus of Hadith now to discuss some of the obligation and missing verses. And we should one thing I just want to kind of point out, because people might say, well, Hadith are made up and this and that, which is true. There was a lot of fabrication of Hadith. The thing is, what I like what Bart Ehrman says. He's a scholar of the Bible, of the New Testament. And what he has said, what he does in his approach, in order to know whether something is fabricated, or it gives you a little bit of an idea, is, was this used to prove a certain doctrine, to convince people to do something? Was this used to propagate a certain worldview or to promote something? If so, then we can say, okay, well, it might have been fabricated. For example, anything in the Bible that's being used to prove Jesus is God, we look at as suspect, because they were trying to prove that. We know that was the purpose, right? Now, when it comes to the Hadith literature, if you have verses that are not necessarily being used to like make Muhammad, he fed like 500 people with his fingers, from the water from his fingers, and the food kept going on and on and on, and like things like that. Of course, we know the process of religions, how myths become greater than life, and people share these stories and they get bigger and bigger. We know that. But when it comes to like things which are against the religion, you wouldn't suspect people would make that up, either because they didn't think it was bad for the religion, or because they just thought it was true, so they spread it. So that's something we can use, because I don't think that anyone would really want to make their own religion look bad, right? So we're looking at evidence that Sunnis were willing to preserve. They preserve this in the holy books for a reason, and this is we're using their own sources. We're not saying it's necessarily true, but if you're a Sunni Muslim and you hold the Hadith in high regard, you have to ask yourself, how can I put two and two together? How can I continue having a cohesive worldview when my own religious scriptures are telling me that there's problems with the other religious scripture? How do I resolve these differences? So I just wanted to add that little bit of an intro before we get to this.
Just before we go ahead, I just want to point out a paradox that occurs if you reject Hadith. So when you see the variance of the Quran and the extent of the variance, the only way Muslims reconcile the variance is they say that Muhammad said that Gabriel gave him the Quran in these 7 or 10 or 14 different ways. Right. So they kind of say that all of these are one Quran with the same meaning, and the variants we find are variants put in there by Allah. Right. But this concept is only found in Hadith. If you reject Hadith, then you're stuck, and the Quran's narrative falls apart completely. Because the Quran only in itself claims that it's going to be preserved, but it doesn't tell you about the variants.
Right. It makes a lot of sense that when you end up with a problem like this, that you would want to say that Gabriel came up and revealed all the 7. I mean, I can even imagine that, like, even Prophet Muhammad himself, that when that example came where someone read the Quran differently, and then I think it was Omar who took it back to him. I don't have the hadith on hand, and then he said, read it to the Prophet how you read it to me, and he read it, and then the Prophet said, oh Omar, take it easy, the Quran was revealed by Gabriel in 7 different dialects. So Prophet Muhammad is also like patting himself on the back, and he's like, yeah, Gabriel told me in all the different ways that you guys are reading it, so it actually saved him from it. So and it made it easier for him to continue spreading his word, because he knew that it would be difficult for people to memorize it in his dialect when they spoke different dialects, right?
Yeah. And the other issue, what you see is in the variants of the Quran, without the Hadith literature, you can't reconcile them. And secondly, if you go to the Hadith itself, the Hadith say that Muhammad himself used to forget the Quran. Now, if the source itself is forgetting the Quran, how can you expect it to remember? He can't even remember one word, and he's going to remember like 7 or 14 different types. And we'll show that Hadith as well when you go further down. Yeah. And that's the point. Like even the people who wrote the Sana 1 manuscript paper, they say that it's really, really hard to sell the idea of oral knowledge being passed on orally and then saying that it's 100% infallibly preserved. It's just not like that. It's such a human practice, and it's inevitable that there will be differences.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's get into this, and this is very interesting. So first, in the first slide, we're just showing the verses from the Quran itself that mention the idea of abrogation, where Allah says in Surah 2, verse 106, that whenever we abrogate or a verse or cause it to be forgotten, we bring one better than it or one equal to it. And the reason, it just says, Allah can do whatever, so he changes his mind. Don't question it, right?
I want to talk about that too. I think this verse is very funny. It's saying we don't cause Muhammad to forget a verse, except we bring a better one or an equal to it one. What do you mean an equal to it one? And then it says, don't you know that Allah is, Allah kulli shayin qadir? I'm sorry, I'm trying to be respectful. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. What do you mean? You cause your prophet to forget the verse and you get another one? That's exactly the same. And then you say Allah is capable. Sorry. Okay. It's nonsensical. Like it's bizarre. It reeks of somebody being caught of forgetting something and saying, no, Allah made me forget. I will come up with another one just as good as that one. Or better. Or better.
It's an excuse to hide yourself from embarrassment. Just blame it on God,
Oh, sorry. This is too fun. Okay.
The funny thing is, if you look at the verse on the extreme right, verse 39 of Surah 13, it says Allah eliminates what he wills or confirms, and with him is the mother of the book.
Right.
What is the mother of the book? Is the mother of the book the Quran that's in the Lawh Mahfuz, which contains all of the abrogated verses as well? Or were they deleted? Or is that is the mother of the book is a collection of more verses, and Allah selects which one he wants to send to us and which one he keeps to himself?
Yeah. So, and this topic is very controversial too, like even among Sunnis about the abrogation. I'd actually met a friend who teaches Arabic, and he had actually, when I was doubting Islam, and he actually told me that there's arguments. He actually thought the whole Dhul Qarnayn argument I had was kind of dumb, but he said there's actually if you wanted to pick an argument that actually would cause some doubt, it would be the issue of abrogation. He's like, that's like a bigger issue than this Dhul Qarnayn thing. And he just admitted that to me, but he wasn't saying he still believes in it. But this is actually a really, really big issue for believers in this book.
It has a severe theological implications too, right? Like, why can't Allah preserve all his message? Why does he change? And a lot of times when we go forward in the discussion, you'll notice that some of the verses have been canceled and are no longer found in the Quran, but they're preserved in the Hadith and they're still applied. For example, the verse of stoning. If Allah still wants to preserve the meaning and keep the punishment as applicable, why would he remove the verse?
You have it in the slides, that example?
Sorry?
You have that example in the slides about? Yeah. Okay, so we'll talk about it then.
All right, so let's go forward. This is
done with this slide? Are we done with this slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first example we're going to talk about it's a very hilarious story as well. So let's start. So in the Quran, there used to be verses that mandated 10 sucklings that would make the marriage unlawful. Then it was abrogated and it was changed to 5 sucklings. And then the verse just doesn't exist in the current Quran. It was deleted.
So this is talking about you cannot. Okay, so this is talking about the concept in pre-Islamic Arabia that Prophet Muhammad included in the Quran, which is that if you are breastfed by the same lady, you can no longer marry that girl. So for example, like if I meet some lady and I want to marry her and I like her, and then I find out, oh, by the way, when she was 2 years old or 1 year old, she was breastfed by the same lady. Because what they used to do is they used to have this culture where they would send out the babies to suckling moms, and they would pay them. So the aristocrats would have money, and instead of breastfeeding their own kids, they would send them off to these ladies who would breastfeed. And this lady became kind of like your mom in the culture, right? She was like, you had some sort of connection with her. But even more than that, in Islam, it's considered like she's related to you now, to the point that you cannot even marry her if she was if she was suckled. So, and the Quran actually mentions this about foster siblings are haram for marriage in Surah Nisa. But just to
Yeah.
give a little bit of context, continue reading it. Go ahead.
So, anyways, the two hadith I showed on the left are from Sahih Muslim. The one on the top right is from Imam Malik, and he says the same thing, but he says something differently, and that's very interesting. He said, amongst what was sent down of the Quran was the 10 known sucklings that make haram, meaning making marriage haram. Then it was abrogated by 5 known sucklings. When the Messenger of Allah died, it was what it is recited of the Quran. Yahya said that Imam Malik said one does not act on it. Now here it seems to imply that even after the death of Muhammad, the verses were still recited as part of the Quran, but they weren't acted upon.
Hold on, let me do that again. When the Messenger of Allah, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, died, it was what is now recited of the Quran. And this was in Imam Malik's Muwatta, which is the earliest collection of hadith that we have, I think 60 to 100 years after Muhammad's time, something like that. It's quite early compared to Bukhari and Muslim. He's saying that it was still recited after the Prophet died. Wow, that's bizarre.
So that shows us that people, not Muhammad, people deleted the verse from the Mus'haf for the recitation. And this makes it even worse, because if abrogation is a concept from God, as the previous verses showed, Muhammad is already dead. Who is God talking to and telling that, hey, delete this verse now?
Wow, that's really odd. And okay, let's continue. These are very interesting examples.
The one on the bottom right is a very, very funny example. It says that the verse of stoning and the breastfeeding verses that we mentioned were written on a paper and placed under the pillow of Aisha. And then the Messenger of Allah died, and people were preoccupied and sad about his death. And suddenly a sheep came and ate the paper with the verses on it. And it's graded as Hasan by Darus Salam. Although I would add that some scholars have said this hadith to be weak.
Okay.
But nonetheless, this is a very interesting take as to, like, somebody tried to, make sense, like, why the verses are missing. So I'm just going to add this story in there that, the goat ate it.
Right.
And I mean, even if the story is true, then that looks so bad on God that a goat ate the verses of the Quran.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. It almost makes you wonder, like, why would they memorize this hadith and why would they pass it on? Like,
Exactly.
why? Why would you do that?
Now, the next slide is going to be very interesting, because the story that's mentioned in the hadith is kind of related to those verses as well. So just to summarize it, I'm not going to read the whole narration. There was a lady who had an adopted son, but Muhammad canceled adoption. So now the adopted sons were your nah mahram. That means that you have to observe a hijab from them, and you can't go in front of them and interact with them like your son or daughter. So this lady says that, hey, this guy, he's a teenager. He even has a beard now. And whenever he sees me, I see signs of disgust, or let's just say she sees signs of him having feelings for the lady. And the lady doesn't like it, and she still wants him to come to her house. So guess what Muhammad said to her? To get rid of his desires for you, breastfeed him, suckle him. I don't even understand how that makes any sense. Now, some people say that it wasn't physical suckling. It was, you got to take the milk out in the cup and then feed and a grown man a cup of milk just so he can be in the same room with you without hijab and be considered your mahram. This is such an unnecessary and weird practice. And what's even interesting is if you go to the next slide.
Okay. Hold on.
Aisha, this is in Imam Malik's Muwatta too. Aisha took this to be literal, and she thought that this is applicable to all of the men. So whichever man wanted to see her, she would order her sister and the daughters of her brother to give milk to whichever man she wanted to see. And then the other wives and the other women were like, this is so bizarre. And then they said, no, this is absolutely ridiculous. We're not going to do this. And then they came up with the idea that the breastfeeding was just an exception for that one man. So this is a very weird incident. It's not just a one-off.
I want to say something, which is again like about this topic, because I know it's not on the topic of obligation, but it's very interesting examples related to the whole thing that you just mentioned, which is I actually know someone who wanted to adopt a Muslim family that wanted to adopt a child. And they found a little boy in Pakistan they wanted to adopt, and the challenge was how to make him mahram to the mom, right? So they got the girl couldn't get pregnant, so they got her sister to, well, first she tried taking some drugs to become like to get milk, but you only get milk when you once you have a baby, your body the female body starts lactating. So she tried taking some drugs that didn't quite work. Then eventually she said she got her sister or something to breastfeed the baby. So now she's kind of like an auntie to her adopted son. So it just shows you that this man-made religion that has all these weird rules in it, in order to work around it, people have to do all these weird things. And it's the same thing with the whole, the whole marriage, how when you divorce someone 3 times, you have to get someone to sleep with the woman before you can marry her again. Islam being a man-made religion, it has all of these weird kind of rulings in it, right? And even the companions of the Prophet, they were like kind of playing these rules to try to make the life easier, right? Because practically you need these men coming and visiting and whatever, and they thought, well, let me suckle them or let me give them milk, and that would solve the problem. It must have been through a cup. That just seems too weird, right? Like, but in general, you're right. Like, this is such a strange thing, and this is based on like a surah, an ayah that was cancelled but used to be in the Quran.
Exactly. And just to highlight the absurdity of it, just imagine like some Scientologist nowadays saying that, hey, if you want to hang out with me, you gotta go drink my wife's milk. And you're like, what the hell are you even saying? That's so ridiculous, right? So
you want to hang out with my wife, right?
Yeah. Like, anyways,
and then there's also, sorry, one more thing. There's also an example of a man that was married to a lady, and then after they were married, they found out she was breastfed by the same mom, and he's like, divorce her. It's like, that's my wife. Nope, you have lost siblings. Divorce her. And the women.
Hilarious stories I've read, and this is also in Imam Malik's Muwatta. I haven't put it in the slides here, but what happened was there was this one guy who wanted to have sex, and he had frequently sex with his sex slave. He also had a wife. Now, his wife didn't like him having sex with his sex slave. So what she did was, when the guy was away, she breastfed the sex slave. Now, when the guy comes up to go to the sex slave, and then the lady's like, oh, too bad you can't have sex with her anymore because she's breastfed by me. And then the guy's like, oh, shit. And he goes back to Omar. And he's like, this is what my wife did. And Omar is like, she's wrong. And then Omar literally says, you can still have sex with your sex slave and then go beat up your wife.
Wow. Nice.
Like, that's the inconvenience that religion can cause at times.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyways, these next are really major hadith or narrations. So on the left-hand side, what we can start with is so Ubay bin Ka'b was the Qari that the Prophet said to listen to if you want to learn the Quran the best way. He goes and asks this guy, how long is Surah Ahzab, which is Surah number 33 in the current Quran, and how many verses do you think it is? The person replied that there are 73 verses. So then he was kind of shocked, like, only 73? And then he said there was a time when this surah was as long as Surah Al-Baqarah. And in that, we read the ayah, the old man and the old women, if they commit zina, stone them both, a punishment from Allah, and Allah is Almighty, most wise.
And Baqarah has, 283, right?
286. And current Surah Ahzab is only 73. So you can do the math and figure out how many hundreds of verses are not found in that surah anymore. For people who wanted to go into details, there's a bunch of references given where this hadith is found or this narration. And Ibn Hazm says about the sanad of this hadith that this sanad is as sahih and as clear as the sun, in which there is no fault. And if you go to the top right again, you will see Ibn Kathir also comment on it. Ibn Kathir is the same guy who wrote the tafsir. He says it's a Hasan Isnad, and he admits this implies that there were more verses in it than the wording and the rulings were both abrogated, and Allah knows best.
So Sunni scholars are saying this was done by God? What are they saying exactly?
They're saying that the verses were abrogated by Allah, and literally they admit that hundreds of verses are just gone from the Quran, from Surah Ahzab now.
So Ubay ibn Ka'b said to Asim, from Zir, how long is Surah Ahzab? 73. He said it used to be as long as Surah Baqarah. So between the point of the original narrator from Ubay ibn Ka'b to whoever he was speaking to, like some bunch of verses, 170 something verses have disappeared.
Yeah.
And scholars say this was done by Allah.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know that? Do we know that this was done by Allah?
Well, if it's abrogated, that means by Allah or on Muhammad's saying.
So why didn't he know that then?
Again, I'm as clueless as you are. Like, why is Ubay asking that question? Because Ubay should have known the verses, and he remembered there were many verses. He even remembers one of the verses in amongst those verses. So again, I would say probably Muhammad told them, oh, these aren't part of the Quran, or they actually just got lost later on, and this was just an excuse.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised even if he told them that these are no longer part of the Quran, if they just accepted that. Like, it's just like, okay, well, yeah, fine.
And this is not just a random one-off hadith. It's been narrated by many different scholars, as you can see in many different books.
Yeah, Ibn Hazm, Ibn Kathir, these are major Sunni scholars, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so should we continue?
Yeah, we can go on to the next slide now. Okay, so these two slides are basically telling us the verse of stoning, and Omar basically clearly says that the verse of stoning was revealed upon Muhammad. Okay, a lot of apologists have tried to twist and say, oh, it was just referring to the verse of stoning in the Torah, but no, it clearly says, I'll read it in Arabic. وأنزل, so إن الله بعث محمد بالحق, that Allah manifested Muhammad with the truth. وأنزل عليه الكتاب, that he gave or revealed upon him the book, and in it فكان فيما أنزل الله عليه آيات الرجم, and in that book that he gave to Muhammad, he revealed the ayah of Rajam. And if you go on the one on the right side, the same Arabic, it's even more clear, I believe. He says, بعث محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم بالحق وأنزل عليه الكتاب فكان فيما أنزل عليه آيات الرجم. So he says basically that he sent Muhammad with the truth. He then revealed a book upon Muhammad, and in that book, he revealed the ayah of stoning. Now, this ayah was found or was written, and even Omar is actually telling people that I am afraid that people might say with passage of time, the verse isn't found in the book of Allah, and thus they can start abandoning this practice. So it's very interesting the severity of which Omar is telling the people about this verse. Now, if you go into the next slide,
just to make this more clear, the first hadith you quoted it says right at the end, agreed upon, mutafaqun alayh. Is considered the gold standard of hadith for Sunni Muslims. When a hadith is mentioned by both Imam Muslim and Imam Bukhari, this means two independent scholars, peer-reviewed, not peer-reviewed, I'm just kidding, but there's definitely two different scholars, major hadith scholars who agree upon a hadith is considered the gold standard of hadith. There is no hadith better than this hadith, right? This is like the best you can get. And then there's also another hadith in Sunan of Abu Dawood, who, according to Sheikh Albani, the Salafi scholar, he has gone through and decided it is also Sahih. Even without the second hadith, we have one hadith clearly says there was a verse in the Quran that said, stone the adulterer. In the Quran, as you said, there's ayat in the kitab of Allah that said this, and it's gone, completely gone. And now we can continue.
Here's the interesting bit. In the slides, 2 slides above, when we were mentioning about the Surah Ahzab,
Yeah.
We saw their translation of the ayah, but now we get the actual Arabic of the ayah. And Omar brings it forward to us, and this, I believe, is from Ibn Majah, and this is classified as Sahih as well. And he says, وَقَدْ قَرَأْتَهَا, we recited in it, الشيخ والشيخة إذا زنيا فرجموهما, that if an old man and an old woman commit adultery, stone them both.
But like the old man and old woman, they're gonna die anyways, like soon. Let them live their life. My God. Like the sheikh and sheikha. You want to stone the sheikh? Come on. Like, who came up with this?
The problem with this specific hadith and the missing, and this ayah being missing, is the idea or the punishment of stoning is still applied in Sunni Islam. And Muhammad acted upon it. And if you go into details, there's a hadith saying that Muhammad practiced it, Abu Bakr practices, Uthman practices, Ali practices, and Umar practiced it. They actually all stoned people to death. And this practice was apparently, it continued after Muhammad's death as well. So what's the wisdom behind taking the ayah out of the Quran if you want to preserve the commandment? And that's why I don't get, why was it not part of the Quran then?
Okay.
And it's incoherent.
So Sunni scholars say that stoning the adulterer to death, not flogging him, is still part of Sunni Islam because the hadith says, and the companions did this. The companions, earliest companions, the 4 Khulafa, they all stoned adulterers. We know that.
Yeah.
And the hadith on top of it says there used to be a verse in the Quran. So the confusing thing is we have the gold standard of hadith, Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari, both having the same hadith that says there used to be verses of adultery, stoning adulterers, but probably Muhammad, for some reason, abrogated the verses. It's very strange. It is extremely strange. I think what would make more sense is that they were lost. I don't know. I don't know, but you're right. It doesn't make sense. Why would you leave the ruling but remove the verse? That's bizarre. Like, that's really bizarre.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyways, let's move on to the next slide. Now, here's a disagreement happening between Ubay and Omar, and this is from Sahih al-Bukhari as well. So Omar says that Ubay ibn Ka'b was the best of us in the recitation of the Quran, yet we leave some of what he recites. Ubay said, I have taken it from the mouth of Allah's messenger and will not leave for anything else. So this is highlighting a very, very, very important subject here, is that Ubay says, I will keep the ayahs that even are abrogated as part of the Quran's recital. And these were in his Mus'haf as well. But Umar says, we don't consider those part of the Quran. And then Ubay is disagreeing with Umar and in very strong words and will not leave for anything whatsoever. And then Umar says, but Allah said, none of our revelations, and then he quotes the verse 2106. This highlights the extent of confusion and disagreements between the Sahaba themselves as to what is and what isn't part of the Quran.
Yeah, and again, beautiful point. This shows us who decided what goes in the Quran. It was a human effort. At the end of the day, there were people that had Qurans with maybe more surahs, more ayat for sure, and their Quran didn't become the official one. The official Quran was the one that Uthman decided. And so this is another great example you brought forward.
Okay, now let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a very interesting incident. I've just narrated like one of the hadith, but this is extensively reported in the hadith literature. And the whole story is that the Prophet sent a group of about 70 people to attack a town, and they failed and they got caught and they got all killed. So Muhammad was praying to Allah to curse the people and all for 40 days. And then an ayah was revealed. And here's the interesting part. We see what the ayah was. And the ayah was merely stating, inform our people, the people who have died, that they have met their Lord and He is pleased with them and they're pleased with Him. Now, the ayah was بَلِّغْ قَوْمَنَا أَنْ قَدْ لَقِينَا رَبَّنَا عَنَّا وَرَضِينَا عَنْهُ. The problem is this was then later on canceled, as the hadith literally says. It was canceled later on. But I just don't understand what's the motive or the wisdom behind canceling this ayah. This is completely spiritual issue. It has no effect on any jurisprudence or anything. If you would have just left it in, what would have changed? Nothing. So a lot of times you don't even understand why they were canceled. They're just gone because they're just gone.
Yeah, that's very, very strange. Maybe Allah changed His mind about being pleased with them?
Could be. Maybe when He met them and they're like, nah, I don't like these guys.
Okay. So, but more seriously, this doesn't make any sense again. Why the verses are moved? I don't know. Doesn't make sense.
This is a very interesting one as well. Now, here again, Ubay brings us forward another alleged ayah is, if the son of Adam were given a valley full of gold, he would love to have a second one. And even if he were given the second one, he would have to love a third, and nothing fills the belly of Adam except the dust. And Allah forgives who repents to him. Now, Ubay ibn Ka'b says, we consider this as a saying from the Quran till the surah 102 was revealed, the mutual rivalry for piling up worldly things that worship you. So till that point, this was considered part of the Quran. Now, the interesting part is this ayah, or why was this ayah actually removed, again, doesn't make any sense. Because the message is consistent with the message of the Quran. It has nothing, if you leave it in there, it's not going to change anything. So why was it removed again? Now, when you go further into the other slides, you will realize that, in fact, it was actually part of a big surah that was forgotten. So let's move on.
So Ubay ibn Ka'b, just to remind everybody, he was a scribe of Muhammad. He was one of the first converts. He was born in Medina, and he was one of the first to accept Islam. He was a scribe of Muhammad. He was one of 25 people who knew the Quran completely by heart. He was one of the original group that Abu Bakr consulted regarding many problems, especially for fatwas and stuff. And he died 30 years after, during the Caliphate of Uthman. So Ubay ibn Ka'b is a major, major companion. He is a scribe of Muhammad on top of that. And he was one of the 25 people who memorized the Quran. And this hadith is coming from him saying that there used to be this spiritual verse about, warding off wealth. And the funny thing is, now, when you think about it, it's kind of funny. We still got the surah. We still got the ayah when it came to the hadith.
Yeah, exactly.
To hadith. So, what was the point of abrogating it? We still heard it anyways, right? Might as well just left it.
Yeah. Why not just keep it in?
And on top of that, again, when it comes to abrogation, you made a very good point. People say, the scholars say that verses were abrogated because the rulings no longer applied. But this has nothing to do with any ruling. This is just like al-hakumut takatur, right? Like, you're going to pile up wealth and so on and so forth. And this is a similar example of that. It's a beautiful kind of saying that, no matter humans, how much wealth you give them, you'll never be happy except when your mouth is full of dust. I mean, that's a beautiful example of how humans are. Our nature is we love piling up things, we love collecting things, but why would you remove that from the Quran unless it was just forgotten, right? And it seems like what we see here is the companions are very insistent on telling people that, like, they're almost like pleading with people to tell them, like, listen, this was part of the Quran. They don't want people to forget this. They want people to know this. It's almost like a desperate plea to try to keep it alive, even though it's gone. It's no longer part of the Quran, right?
Exactly.
And Ubay, yeah, go ahead.
And one thing you notice is Allah says in those verses earlier in 2:106 that He either makes them to forget the ayah or changes it with a better one. And the thing is, why does He keep letting people remember the ayah that He's trying to cancel out, you know?
Muhammad forgot it, but the companions didn't forget it. Which is, again, human nature. Sometimes will forget things. Now, there's one more thing interesting about this this whole obligation thing, which is this so-called Arabic of the Quran, where it says that, you know, where he actually quotes, if the son of Adam was given a valley full of gold. This verse could be actually satisfying the challenge of a surah or ayah like it. Because yet again, this is not part of the Quran that we have. Yet it matches the language, the grammar, everything of the Quran. This could be easily another, you know, because, and the point I'm trying to make is the challenge of bring another surah like it, or bring another, it's a nonsensical challenge. It's easy to fulfill. The language is nothing special or unique about the Quran. It is actually nothing amazing about it. It has some amazing parts and it has some terrible parts, just like any other human effort.
All right, let's go to the next slide. This one is very important. This is in Sahih Muslim. And if you notice that this man gathered hundreds of reciters, hundreds of qaris who remembered the Quran. And he said to them, we used to recite a surah which resembled in length and severity to Surah Bara, which is Surah Tawbah or Surah 9. I have, however, forgotten it with the exception of this which I remember out of it. And then he quotes the same ayah that if there were two valleys and then you give it to the son of Adam, he won't be satisfied till he eats dust. He said that there was a surah that was as long as surah number 9 of the Quran. The whole surah has disappeared, and definitely this ayah has also gone with it. And then he goes on that there was another surah, resembled one of the surahs of Musabihat, and I have forgotten it as well. And then he quotes another ayah that used to be part of the Quran again. O people who believe, why do you say that which you do not practice? And that is recorded in your necks as a witness against you. You would be asked about it on the day of resurrection. Again, why are these verses in surahs, the whole surahs have gone missing? It's just hard to understand what's the logic or the reason or the wisdom behind it. And and again, this is from Sahih al-Muslim. So it's an authentic narration.
And I just want to share one thing quickly, which is I want to go back to the email of Yasir Qadhi here, and I just want to talk about it for a second. Yasir Qadhi has, in his first year at Yale University, been exposed to something that has, you know, like he said, basically been a crisis of knowledge for him. I'm just going to read his email because this is something that hasn't been, people don't know about, and it's kind of being, you know, hidden from the masses, right? He's saying that the preservation of the Quran is a fact because Allah says so. Okay, so first he's saying his belief. Then he's saying we need to be mature enough to question what exactly hifth entails. So he's giving a disclaimer right at the beginning because he doesn't want anyone to call him a disbeliever. So right at the beginning, he's saying, well, Allah says it's preserved, so it's preserved. Fine. But what does that mean? And then he's saying a failure to do so will lead to major problems amongst an ever-growing group of intellectually curious Muslims, for whom the standard medieval narrative simply holds little academic weight.
And he mentions something very important as well. Notice he says in the first paragraph, last two lines, the book I mentioned about, as well, a cursory reading of Kitab al-Masahif of Ibn Abu Dawud would indicate, to me at least, and I know it is an arguable point, that earlier scholars were far more open to the notion of minor variations than the later ones are.
And can you elaborate on that a bit?
So that book is written by the son of Abu Dawud, the great hadith scholar, and that book brings staggering variations. Those aren't minor, as he says. That book contains 2 extra surahs that were part of Ubayd's codex. There's whole two surahs, Surah Haft and Surah Khalq. It also mentions,
Does it actually mention the full surahs?
yes, it does.
Wow.
The whole text is given, and
Wow.
they're startlingly exactly like the Quran and exactly what you would expect the Quran would sound like. And then it goes into major variants where it alleges that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud didn't consider Fatiha to be part of the Quran and didn't consider the last two Mawdatain, the Quls, to be part of the Quran. And then, like, I have made posts about this. The book has not been translated into English yet. It's in Arabic. I have screenshots from that book. We will link that in the description as well. But there are an immense number of variants mentioned in that book. It's staggering. They have direct eyewitness accounts, people reading the Codex of Ali, Codex of Ibn Masud and Ubay, and the variations don't. They're not just like the ones found in the Sana Quran. The alleged variations are whole verses, complete verses that affect the meaning really severely. And there's one variant where it mentions muta in the Quran.
Wow.
Yeah. And the added phrase that implicates is one of the verses in Surah Nisa, I believe, that marry something. The phrases that's added is ila ajli musamma, till a prescribed period. And I believe this was in Ubay bin Ka'b's codex as well, as reported. And that ayah totally changes its meaning if that's taken into consideration. And instead of just being about marriage, it becomes about muta.
And you want to explain what muta is?
Muta is basically temporary marriage, which is, suppose you're out and about and you don't have your wife around you. So you basically ask a woman to marry you for, suppose, 2 days, 3 days, or whatever time. You pay her some meher, like some dowry, and yeah, you're basically married for her for, like, it's contract marriage for a few.
Right. So basically, it's similar. I don't think Muslims would like the analogy, but it's similar to prostitution, where you pay money to sleep with a lady for a period of time, but she becomes your wife, right? Anyways, and Muhammad actually allowed this, and now you're saying this actually in this book of Ibn Abu Dawud, there's indications that there was words in the Quran that allowed muta as well, but have been removed.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very, very interesting. And if anybody has the full text of this email from Yasir Qadhi that was posted online August 2017, I would just please, if you can please send it to me, the full emails. We'd love to go into more detail as to what he said. I don't have the full emails. I just have these little pieces. So just to read again what Yasir Qadhi said. He said that there's an ever-growing group of intellectually curious Muslims. And that would include like you, Abdullah Gandhi. Like, you've looked into this, you've learned this, and I haven't personally done this. I'm being exposed to this for the first time, and I'm shocked. You've shaken my faith in the preservation of the Quran. I have to say, like, honestly, I thought it was preserved. Even as an ex-Muslim, I thought it was preserved. And now what you've told me is kind of like even me as a disbeliever, I didn't know any of this stuff. I didn't realize about any of these books. And what Yasir Qadhi is saying, he personally knows about a dozen Muslims in academia who had major crises of faith, and perhaps one that left the faith. He doesn't want to say not he didn't leave the faith. He wants to say perhaps he left the faith because of this issue. And he had his own personal crisis of knowledge. It came close to a crisis of faith, he says, when I entered into this realm during my first year at Yale. And felt my world come crashing down in front of me. I didn't know what to believe about the hifz of the Quran anymore because there was no alternative. He is saying that despite studying in the Muslim world for 10 plus years, this destroyed, I don't want to say destroyed, his world came crashing down around him. So we know that there's information, there's knowledge, there's books that are being hidden away from the masses. Scholars are told, don't talk about this, don't touch this. And Yasir Qadhi is seeing something, just like Hamza Soitis is seeing something. He's ahead of the curve when it comes to this, and he's seeing that people are noticing this, that the academics is becoming more mainstream, that people are realizing that the preservation of the Quran, just like Hamza Soitis is ahead of the curve, and he's stopped talking about the Quran being a scientific miracle. Now the same thing is happening with Yasir Qadhi. He's noticed something which is the Quran preservation narrative, is being challenged. And he's saying we have to talk about this privately. We need to discuss this. We need to figure out how we're going to resolve this, because what's happening is in the age of knowledge and information, people are figuring out these things. And so the scholars, they can't just hide this anymore. They have to talk about it. So Yasir Qadhi is trying in this private list of his to get people to talk about this. And these people will now go and disseminate this new paradigm, just like the new paradigm of Hamza Surtis, of multi-layered, multi-faceted, multi-perspective, Quran. So Yasir Qadhi is doing the same thing, right? He's trying to be ahead of the curve. But what's happening is people are seeing the truth now, right? People are getting access to stuff that they didn't know, that wasn't talked about. And so we have to continue this. We have to show people that this is what is being hidden, right? So they can decide for themselves, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, there's really strong implications of these ideas, because these ideas challenge the fundamental claim about the Quran. And suppose you can say you reject the hadith and all the verses that are mentioned in the Quran that were lost, but then you're stuck that, okay, if I don't believe in the hadith, then I cannot reconcile the existent variants in the Quran, in the manuscripts. And you're stuck. You're like, it's either corrupted or it's a mess. And that's what he meant by his world came crashing down. Because it's the fundamental basis of Islam that the Quran is preserved.
And this is why he has to really tiptoe around this. This is why he can't just come out and talk about this in public, because there would be mass confusion, mass fitna. There would be a crisis among Muslims, as
many Muslims
of faith, the same crisis of faith that he had. Sorry, he doesn't want to say crisis of knowledge. The same crisis of faith that the dozen Muslim academics he knows had would become mass crisis of faith among the Muslim Ummah. When a scholar of Islam cannot resolve these issues, what do you expect from a layman? And this is why when Dawah Man made the video about Yasir Qadhi, people were crying. I read comments of people saying they saw this video about Yasir Qadhi and they were crying because they didn't know what to believe anymore. Like, people look up to these scholars, and when these scholars can't see the way through the mess, what does it mean for the typical Muslim, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And this is why, like, people are also, like, questioning his faith now. I mean, I don't think we should question his faith. I do believe he's a sincere believer in Islam. He's found a way to make sense of this mess in his own mind. So, in my opinion, I think it's cognitive dissonance. But I have no problem in saying he's a believer. He's a believer in Islam. But these certain dogmatic Muslims, they will have this narrative that they consider to be divine, right? Despite it being unacademic, they wanna crucify Yasir Qadhi by saying, oh no, he's not Muslim, or his iman is in question now because of what he's saying. But the reality is, the facts don't add up with what you've been taught, right? The dogmatic perspective.
Yeah. Definitely, and that's a huge issue, and it's I hope this reaches out to as many people as it can, and it's gonna have serious consequences for a lot of Muslims, because, like I said, when they see these variants, their world will come crashing down.
Yeah.
So anyways, let's continue and let's go.
Yeah. Are you okay for time? Because I know it's gone on a little bit long.
Keep going. We'll finish till the end where satanic verses is, and then we'll call it a day.
Okay.
All right. So let's go to the next slide. This is a very, very interesting one. So in the current Quran, we see this ayah in Surah 2, verse 238. حافظوا على الصلوات والصلاة الوسطى وقوموا لله قانتين. Now, if we look at the top right in Sahih Muslim, this is also mentioned in Sahih Bukhari and multiple other places. I just showed just one or two narrations. There was this man transcribing a copy of the Quran for Aisha, and then Aisha said, when you reach this verse, guard the prayers and the middle prayer. And then when the guy reached it, he told her, and then she said, and add this to it. She said she heard Muhammad recite the verse as حافظوا على الصلوات والصلاة الوسطى والصلاة العصر وقوموا لله قانتين. And there's an extra word in it. Now, a lot of Muslim apologists have said, oh, the Salatul Asr was just a tafsir of the word wusta and what the Salatul Wusta meant. But when you go down to the hadith just below it, and this has been reported multiple times as well in the Sahihain, it's just the hadith under it, it says that the verse was revealed with the word Salatul Asr in it. And the Sahaba says, we recited it like that as long as Allah will, and then it was cancelled and abrogated, and then changed. Now the point being is, why would you reveal a verse with an extra word, then cancel it, and then say that Salatul Wusta meant Salatul Asr? Why cause this confusion? What is the motive behind it again?
Yeah. So Ghazal prayers and the Asr prayer. Yeah, I remember this surah. People say Salatul Wusta is Salatul Asr, but it actually explicitly said that according to Aisha.
Mm-hmm. And the Sahabi literally says, I have already informed you how this verse was revealed and how Allah abrogated it, and then he just says, Allah knows best.
Okay.
All right, let's go to the next slide. This is very interesting. Now, there's going to be 3 hadiths, these 2 here and the one below. And basically, Muhammad is walking around and he listens to the Quran being recited in the mosque. And then he says that, may Allah have mercy upon this guy who reminded me of such and such a verse that I was made to forget. And basically, it's simply an admission of Muhammad's weak memory that he would forget the Quran himself.
So how come hadith narrators don't review and put blame on Muhammad as the narrator of the Quran? Because if he had a weak memory, then, well, how do we know the Quran's really the right Quran?
Yeah, if the source is flawed, then you can't trust anything else. Everything else.
All narrators and all hadith because of one guy had a false memory. But now we're talking about the first guy in the chain between Allah and Jibril and us that has a weak memory and is forgetting stuff. But Allah, of course, Allah made him forget. So that's okay. That's fine.
And again, right? Like, I forgot. Oh, no. Allah made me forget. It's the same thing. You just forgot.
Yeah.
Anyways, the next slide just mentions the same.
This is the wife of Prophet Muhammad in Bukhari and Muslim saying that he acknowledged that he forgot a verse. Like, oh, guys, thanks for reminding me what Allah taught me. Good job.
And it shows up again, a longer version of the same story, but they mention the name of the person who reminded Muhammad the verses. And that's in Sahih Bukhari as well.
Why did they memorize and preserve this? I don't understand. Like, this doesn't make sense. Why would you want to say that? Like, I guess the only thing I can think of is that people were so strongly believed in this message that they didn't care how stupid it sounded. They're like, yeah, so he forgot. Allah made him forget. So what? What's the big deal? Yeah. I have even more iman. Have you ever heard Muslims tell you that? I have more iman after you told me this. My iman has increased. You've given me more iman. I'm a better Muslim because of you. I'm like, okay, great. Maybe.
Like, I can already see somebody saying, see, Allah said in verse 2:106 that Allah can cause people to forget the ayah and bring a new one. And then they say, see, Prophet said the same. Allah caused them to forget. Subhanallah, it's a miracle.
Yeah. Oh, I love this one.
This one is the best one in my opinion, because this literally catches Muhammad in the act of editing the verses and catches him off guard. Basically, what's happening here is in 495, the verse initially was revealed, not equal are the believers who sit at home. This is in relation to people who fight in the way of Allah. Now, Muhammad says, okay, the verse is here, and then he orders somebody to bring ink and a wooden board or a piece of bone so they can write the word. Then they wrote the verse. Now, after they'd written the verse, there was a blind man sitting behind Muhammad, and he said, but, O Messenger of Allah, what about me? I am blind. I can't go to fight. So am I also included in the admonition? Allah saying that I'm not equal to the believers who sit at home? But then Muhammad like, oh, and then suddenly the verse gets edited like on the spot, and then Allah reveals that not equal to those believers who sit at home, except those who are disabled and those who strive. And you can just see that this is Muhammad editing the message after realizing, oh, he forgot to add this.
Yeah, I love this example. I absolutely love it because it's so startlingly honest. Like, it's so the exact words is that not equal are those believers who sit at home and those who strive and fight in the cause of Allah. So Allah is saying the major jihad, the better jihad is those that strive and fight in the cause of Allah, right? He's defining it. And then, because you have some people that say, no, the greatest jihad is jihadun nafs, to purify your soul. No, the Quran says the opposite. The Quran says you're not equal, the guys who sit at home and the guys who go and fight, right? The guys that go and fight are better, right? By ranks, right? And then this guy who is the same man who was the surah of Abasa was revealed, the blind man that Prophet Muhammad turned away from, was like, but what about me? I am blind. I can't go fight in the cause of Allah. Hold on. So Allah has revealed instead of that verse, not equal to those who sit at home, except those who are disabled. Try and fight in the cause of Allah. So the blind man went home happy that he has an excuse not to fight in jihad.
Yeah, and this is also from Sahih Bukhari, and it's been narrated from different sources multiple times, the same narration.
And Muslims have brought up to me that like this is like the whole life of Muhammad. Like yes, in the early stages, verses didn't come down when he wanted them to. But like in Medina, we're talking about like anything happens, it's like a surah comes down. Like, people are staying in his house for too long. But it's been revealed to me, you guys must leave my house, and you don't stay for too long, and you don't bother the Prophet because the Prophet doesn't like it, but he's too shy to tell you. But Allah is not too shy to tell you, so leave so he can spend time with his wives, and don't stay and make small talk, right? It's like on demand. It's like, he wants to marry the whole thing about Zainab. It's like, it's been revealed to me that Allah has married Zainab to you, and then he walks into the house and he's now married to her, and she's shocked, and he's like, yeah, Allah married you from above the 7 heavens, and she starts boasting about that. Yeah, you guys, you had normal nikahs with your dad, and your dad was wali. Allah was my wali. He was married from above the 7 heavens. So we see that, actually the reality is that the whole life of Muhammad was like this. Like coming up with revelations to suit his needs. But
there's literally a verse in Surah Hujurat, I believe, that says to the believers that don't raise your voices higher than Muhammad's, or you'll literally lose all your good deeds.
Oh, yes. And some of the companions were like concerned about this because they had loud voices.
Yeah.
Right? One companion is like, oh my God, my all my deeds are gone. And they're like, no, not you, because this means don't be over, like, speak over him, basically. Right?
Yeah, basically.
Good point.
So if you go to the next one, it's a similar example of Muhammad editing the verse, and this is absurd because this is causing unnecessary confusion among the people. So this verse was revealed about the day and night, but the part that we find now in the Quran, Min al-Fajr, was not revealed initially, and people were confused what it really meant. So it's about distinguishing the whiteness of the thread. And people, what actually they started doing is they would tie threads to their legs, and then at the suhoor time, they'll wait till the thread would turn white, or they could see the difference between the two threads. And this was just causing unnecessary confusion. So then suddenly Allah's like, oh, you know what? I'll just add an extra word to clarify it. And this hadith is in Bukhari as well. And it is a staggeringly honest hadith, and it's just blatantly obvious what's going on here. Is Muhammad writes an ayah and then causes confusion, and he's like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to amend it and make it better and clear the confusion away. If Allah is omnipotent and omniscient, he wouldn't even cause the confusion or let the confusion happen in the first place, because he'd know what would have happened if he would have not revealed the ayah correctly.
Yeah, and that brings up another example of how in the beginning, if you read the tafsir and you read the hadith and you understand that in the beginning in Ramadan, it was forbidden to have any sex whatsoever with your wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then the surah of the Quran came down where it actually says that you guys were having, it actually tells you the context, right? In the Quran, it says that you guys were having, Allah has seen you were having difficulties,
Mm-hmm.
So now he says, okay, now you can have sex with your wives at night.
Exactly.
In Ramadan. So it's like Allah didn't think about it ahead of time that, telling all these men who he allowed sex slaves on top of it, not to have sex for 1 month. He didn't think this is gonna happen. Like he didn't realize, so he had to like, okay, guys, I see this is a little bit tough for you. Change it. We're gonna let you guys have sex. I saw you guys are being bad boys. When doing what you were supposed to do, you're supposed to be reading Quran all night. But you guys were being bad. I'm gonna let it go this time. I'm gonna say you guys now you can have sex in Ramadan. It's all good. So yeah, another funny example of how it's not really obligation, but it's the same idea.
Yeah, it's editing in addition.
I didn't know this example. Thanks for reminding me of that.
All right. This is a very funny one where Sahabas were disagreeing. Again, this is in Bukhari and Muslim, and it's in other places too. So the current Quran we have, it has, I think this is Surah Shams, and the verses go, وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَى وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا تَجَلَّى وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنثَى. But the hadith basically said that there was a group of Sahabas that were actually arguing over how this verse should be. And the way others recited is, and by the male and the female. They didn't include the phrase وَمَا خَلَقَ. They just says وَالذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنثَى. And then the Sahabi who's narrating the hadith says that the other people tried to convince him really hard, وَمَا خَلَقَ is part of it, but he said, I didn't accept it because I didn't hear it from the Prophet. So again, you're trusting these same people who transmit you the Quran perfectly, who can't even agree amongst themselves what is part of the Quran and what isn't.
Yeah, that's another great example. So Abu Darda said that by the night when it envelops, and by the day it appears in brightness, and by the male and female. Wow. So Abu Darda was adamant that people were trying to force him to remove those verses.
Mm-hmm. Or change it. Yeah. And he still didn't accept it from him.
Wow.
Okay. So I think this is the last example we're going to touch upon. And this is the incident of the satanic verses, the notorious incident. It's very well documented. And what you're seeing right now on your screen is from Sirah of Ibn Hisham ibn Ishaq. It's one of the earliest Sirahs ever written. This incident goes that basically Muhammad was longing for some way to help his people that were being tortured by the Meccans, and he wanted to make the Meccans happy. Now, one day he's sitting with all the chiefs of Mecca around him by the Kaaba, and he recites Surah Najm. And at the end, when he gets there, he mentions the three goddesses, Lat, Manat, and Uzza. And then it says that the Satan came up to him and then forced him to mention the goddesses in a good light. And I believe if you go to the next slide, it will show you what he exactly said. Okay, so on the right side, this is also narrated in the history of Tabari. And he said, have you thought upon Allah, Manat, Uzza, the other one? And then Satan said, cast it on his tongue. These are the high-flying cranes. Verily, their intercession is accepted and with approval. So basically, he's going against his monotheistic message and endorses these three pagan goddesses of the Quraysh. What ends up happening is then Muhammad falls in prostration, and so do all the chiefs of the polytheists, and they're all happy. They're like, oh, look, Muhammad has accepted our gods, and now we're all reconciled, and everything's good. But then Muhammad's own followers are like, hey, man, look, you've been pushing monotheism for so long. There's one God, and then suddenly now there are three. So then Muhammad realizes, oh, no. Now he says that, oh, this was because when I was reciting, Satan intervened and caused me to say those things. And this is shocking, because this now brings the whole integrity of Muhammad into doubt, because he is basically changing the Quran just to get benefit from it, or to lessen the suffering of his people by bending over and accepting the beliefs of his enemies.
So this isn't mentioned in Tabari, you said?
Yeah, this is mentioned in Tabari as well. Early years of Prophet, I forgot what the exact volume is, but I'll put that in the description.
Which book is this one that we're quoting from right now?
This is from Tabari.
This is Tabari, and the previous one.
Yeah, that is from the Life of Muhammad by Ibn Ishaq.
Okay. So in
On the
Ibn,
left, now a lot of people say that this story has no basis and they say it's a fabrication. But once you look at the next slide on the left side, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani has something really profound to say about it. That he says all the paths of this hadith are either weak or cut off, except of that of Sa'id ibn Jubair. However, the profusion of the chains show that the story has a basis. Furthermore, there are two mursal chains whose narrators are those of Bukhari and Muslim. The first one is narrated by Al-Tabari, which is the one on the right that I'm showing,
right.
and through Yunus, and then he goes on to the chain. The second is what Tabari also narrated through Al-Mutammir, and then he goes on for the chain. And then he basically says that Iyad, some scholars like Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi and al-Qadi al-Iyad have claimed thereby the story has no basis at all. Then he comments on their analysis saying, when the paths of a hadith are many and distinct, it shows that the report has a basis. Then he says further, so as I said, there are three sound but mursal chains for it. Among them, what meets the criteria of the two sahihs, but for the fact that they're mursal. Mursal is basically you have the whole chain that goes up to a companion of the Prophet and not to the Prophet himself. Now, in early Islam, a lot of the companions would talk amongst themselves, and it was a given that, that they heard it from the Prophet. So they would just say, hey, I heard from Abu Bakr, who heard from Omar, who heard from this. So they wouldn't put the Prophet in the chain. It'll be cut off just at the end. But they were still accepted by a lot of muhaddithin of Sahih Hadith. And the point is that this story was abundantly mentioned. It has different sources, even if it's a little weak. The different sources and the different chains strengthen it altogether. Plus, the narrators of I believe three of the narrations are the narrators that even Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari agree upon. And this was mentioned by Ibn Hajar in Fath al-Bari, that is a commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari in 1959 in volume 8. Now, if you go further down...
So just to summarize this issue, because it's a little bit complicated. Mm-hmm. So we have the earliest book, earliest seerah that we have, which is Ibn Ishaq, correct?
Yeah.
In Ibn Ishaq, it says that Muhammad has spoken of the gods in a splendid fashion. So he actually had read. Oh yeah, it says that at the top. It says these are exalted Gharanik with swans whose intercession is approved. So this is in Ibn Ishaq, the earliest seerah that we have. Then Gabriel came to the Prophet and said, "What have you done, Muhammad?" So me as a non-Muslim, I would say that Muhammad maybe regretted saying this. He maybe got a little bit carried away with himself. Yeah. Maybe, who knows? I mean, clearly I don't believe Gabriel spoke to him, but he came up with this, and then basically this was the basis of the companions actually coming back from Abyssinia, because they actually thought that the Quraysh were happy with Islam now, and this actually caused a lot of confusion. So this is the earliest example we have. Then we have in Tabari, which says basically the same thing. So Tabari is again a very early source. And then we have a scholar, Ibn Hajar, in his commentary on Sahih Bukhari, saying, Fath al-Bari, saying that he thinks that this story does have a basis. When we get to the later sources, for example, Bukhari and Muslim, I don't know if you talk about that, it doesn't mention that detail. Am I correct? I think I remember Yasir Qadhi saying that by the time you get to Sahih Bukhari, they don't mention the part about...
Because it looks bad on Muhammad.
Yeah, so this... Go ahead.
But what's funny is the Quran mentions and references this story clearly in the next slide. If you go, it's Surah Hajj, Surah number 22, verse number 52. I attached the Urdu translation because my initial video was in Urdu. If you can pull up the English translation, that'd be great.
So which one is it?
2252.
Okay. I'm putting it. Okay. This one?
52. Verse 52, yeah.
Right.
And now, interestingly, look what the verse itself says. And we did not send before you any messenger prophet, except that when he spoke or recited, Satan threw into it. But Allah abolishes what Satan throws in. Allah makes precise his verses. This is an admission of Satan intervening with Muhammad's speech. And Allah says it happens all the time with other prophets too. Now you're begging the question, like, how do I even trust the guy? Because he can be tricked by Satan just like that, you know?
But Allah corrects it later because Allah is with all things capable. So Satan sometimes throws in something into the Quran when the prophets speak. Allah knows about it, and he'll correct it. Don't worry. And also the prophet sometimes forgets things, but don't worry. Allah gives him another equal verse or a better verse. So, okay, there we go.
Now, if you could, can you open go to altafsir.com and open the tafsir on this by Jalalain? So he goes into great lengths and he actually references this as the same incident. And he explains that what had happened was exactly as described in Tabari and Ibn Asaq as well.
Which one?
Tafsir al-Jalalain is fine, yeah.
Okay, can you see it?
Yeah. So first he translates the verse itself, and then he goes on to tell the story that he was sitting in the company of the Quraysh, and when he recited, Satan cast into his recitation what is not from the Quran, but those of which the Prophet had been sent would find pleasing, exactly as the story tells us. And then he says the good things about the goddesses, and then people all bow down, and then Gabriel comes and then later informs him and fixes the verse. So the point being made is that this isn't an unfound story. It has a basis not only in Sirah and Hadith literature, literally itself in the Quran, because the Quran references it. And this brings us back to the point, it's so patently obvious at this after this discussion that Muhammad was making all of this up. We've covered so far variations in manuscripts that vary from missing words to different words to literally rearrangement of sentence structure. And then we have come across different missing words, phrases in the manuscripts. Then the current Qur'ans themselves have variations. And then the hadith said that Muhammad would forget, and then he would actually be lured by Satan to saying stuff. Then Muhammad would edit verses on the spot. How can we not clearly see what's going on now? Yeah. And this incident, part of this satanic verses incident, is mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim and other hadith, as you said, that Yasir Qadi mentioned, that it mentions a part of the Quraysh are sitting there and then they all bow down with Muhammad, but it doesn't tell the details prior to that what led up to the incident, what verses he recited. And one would really question, why would the kuffar who were hell-bent on torching Muhammad at that time would suddenly bow down with him?
Yeah.
If you say that, it's the eloquence of Surah Najm, that's why they bow down. No, because they'd heard the Quran before Surah Najm for years and years, and something like this didn't happen.
Yeah.
So again, to summarize that, I believe my views are that the Quran definitely has human intervention in it. It has been changed. It has been played with. It has been revised, and at certain points, it's been edited to make it sound better. Even if you go into the manuscripts in a lot more detail, if you want to go do more reading, you'll see that to some of the variants, later on, the scribes, a few centuries later, would come up, would make asterisks, and then on the margins, write words to add. And those additions are now found in the current Quran as well. So what I want to do is I wish people would understand and let go of the belief that the Quran is word to word preserved. It's not. Okay, Muslim scholars know about it for centuries. They've been debating this. In fact, these are Muslims who bring these things forward to us, all these variants. So let's be honest with ourselves. Let's address this issue. Let's be intellectually honest about it. And I'd make a plea to the Muslim scholars is stop telling the people that it's been preserved dot to dot. It's not. It's a lie. You're feeding people just to make the Quran seem miraculous.
Yeah, absolutely. Just want to say thanks again for that amazing presentation. Most of this I have never studied, and even to me, it's new. Like I'm not aware of any of this stuff. Just little tidbits about the abrogation and stuff, but not about the manuscripts. I never looked into that. I never looked into the satanic verses to the depth that you have, and I'm impressed that you managed to make all these slides on your phone. That's crazy. You did all this on your phone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God! Like, what's next? You're gonna be making like fancy YouTube videos on your phone or something. So everyone, just want to say, give a big thanks to Abdullah Gondal. He did an amazing job. Again, all on his phone, and this was the second time he's presenting this information. The first time was in Urdu, and now in English. And I'm very, very happy to have this opportunity to discuss. It's gone on. It took a little bit longer because we stopped and reflected a lot, which I think was helpful. And so this will be up live. The link is already there for the PDF if anyone wants to see it. Please keep studying. Do you have any resources you want to recommend to people?
Yes. If you want to read about the variants in the Quran, and there's books written by Gerard Poin, Jeffrey Arthur. There's another one, the Syriac Aramaic reading of the Quran, where a lot of the words in the Quran itself are just not even from Arabic. Like, for example, the word hur, I think it's in Aramaic, it means grapes. And when you put that there, you're like, oh, there'll be abundance of grapes in Jannah instead of abundance of wide-eyed virgins. There's a lot to it. There is no consensus per se as to how the Quran was compiled, even amongst scholarship and academia. I mean, nobody in academics takes the idea that the Quran was preserved word to word seriously. What they do say is that the variations reported in the Hadith literature, sometimes those variants are found in the manuscripts. A book I can recommend is Which Quran by Ibn Waraq. It's a collection of articles, scholarly articles, and then he puts his own input in it as well at the end. Definitely, there's a lot of papers on the issue on scribd.com. You can just write Quran textual variants and you'll find many. Again, there are different types of manuscripts. Not all are available online. So you have to do a lot of digging.
Okay. Let's say you finally have concluded that the Quran is not the word of God. What's the next steps? What should a person do who's in this situation now that he's not sure? He has a lot of doubt based on what he's understood, and doubt is a sign, your mind is telling you that everything is not cohering, everything is not adding up together. Something's wrong. So, I would recommend people listen to your mind. The doubt is there for a reason. It's telling you something is wrong. I would recommend, keep studying, keep researching. And if you feel like you want to leave Islam, you're most welcome to. I mean, you don't have to stick in the religion that your parents gave you. And you have every right to leave Islam if you feel that it's not the word of, it's not from Allah, not from God. You can still call yourself Muslim if you want to call yourself Muslim. Many people are not able to openly come out and become ex-Muslims. Many of us, we're lucky enough to be living in the West where we have tolerance, and there's a lot of tolerance, and we, even so, still we're doing what we do comes with a risk involved, and a lot of, some stress and some pressure from people and family and friends, and it's more difficult the more conservative your family is. But my advice to people is, keep learning. You don't have to leave Islam. You're most welcome to. But if you feel confident that this is not the word of God, then you're most welcome to live your life. Get your life back. Be a free man. You make your own purpose. Join a community, a local community of people that have left the faith. And because you'll find that people that leave faith go through a lot of common problems. They have a lot of common issues that they face, how to deal with friends and family, and what to tell their parents, and when to tell their parents, if they should tell their parents, and all that. So again, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to add before we end it?
No, that should be good. I was just thinking if people had any questions they wanted to ask.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be tough now because we've gone on for quite a while, and I don't see any particular. It seems like everyone's just discussing. So, okay, we'll just end it there. Thank you, everyone. And don't forget to subscribe so that you can be notified on the next live one we're going to be doing. The next one is probably going to be another Urdu talk. We'll see. We're looking into it. Abdullah Gondal and Hirs Sultan will be doing the next one most likely. And there's a debate coming up with Hirs Sultan, and Nadir Ahmed is going to be coming up as well on the channel. So don't forget to, again, click on the bell so you can be notified when the next one comes. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.